Iraqi Jews were convinced that Israel had a hand in uprooting them. After the 1948 war, there was mounting popular hostility towards the Jews in Iraq. 5 bombs exploded in Jewish sites. The series of bombs created a panic which led more and more Jews to register to leave the country. I met an elderly friend of my mother's, an Iraqi Jew called Yaakov Karkukli, who had been in the Zionist underground. One member of his group, Yosef Basri, a very, very intelligent Jewish lawyer, and his assistant, Shalom Saleh Shalom, were responsible for 3 out of the 5 bombs. Basri's controller was an Israeli intelligence officer named Max Binet, who was based in Tehran.
Welcome to the Daily Wrap-Up, a concise show dedicated to bringing you the most relevant, independent news as we see it from the last 24 hours. Friday, November 24th, 2023. Thank you for joining me today. I've got a great show planned for you today. I'm going to start with some COVID-19 updates, some information that I think is important to see, a pretty alarming update on some artificial intelligence directions for the government, which we've all been screaming about seemingly everywhere around the world, but seems to be debated whether we should do it or not. We're going to talk about a couple of one other thing I think I added in the beginning. Well, some great articles we just put out as well. Oh, there's also just another one article I want to point out to start that is about how the military, again, something we actually have already predicted, but kind of saw based on the facts already happening, but predicted was going to get worse. The military basically arguing that the forever chemicals, PFAS, are a problem, but, it's a necessary evil because we need it for the military. Or rather that we need to do things that produce them to such large degrees for your security. I mean, it's the same thing as the ESG arguing that oil and gas and nuclear weapons are somehow green when used for fighting for freedom. It's an absurd reality. And I think, again, everybody seems to be finding the courage to call out these absurdities and are not getting cowed away or, shouted down by the two-party paradigm or people that are, the ones you're supposed to listen to. People are starting to ask questions about everything. Now, these opening things are going to be important just because it's for the future, where things are going. But I don't want us to miss these other topics as we get into specifically Israel and Palestine today. We're going to start off with a discussion about the really fake news again. I want to go through a couple more points about developing lies, but one big one that we're going to start with that I made the main image today. Lord Bebo, the one that broke this, as far as I can tell, just a really blatant and embarrassing example. And I can't tell to what degree Fox News is aware, but I'll make some points about where they're standing that makes it pretty obvious they're kind of just going along to get along. But we're in real time, you catch them catching a bad guy and then as they're moving the cameras, you see this, what appears to, in my opinion, probably be an IDF member getting dressed again. And they're like, no, stop looking. It's really bad. But so is everything else we've been seeing. And the only people seemingly allowing this to go by without acknowledgement, seemingly acting like everything is the way it should be, that genocide's within international law. It's fools and fanatics. That's all we're dealing with right now. And I really believe that the vast majority of people out there around the world it doesn't mean that they're not, you may have different sides in this. You may feel that Palestine shouldn't exist or whatever it is, but the vast majority of any side is aware that Israel's lying, that Israel's government seems to have been involved in whatever happened, at the very least killing their own people, and that what's going on over here is one of the worst genocides we've ever seen. What's the right word for that? Not per cap, like based on the size and the time frame of what's happened. Undeniably. Everybody sees that. One of these classic quotes, I believe, was originally stated by Bertrand Russell, I think, but it is ultimately that, and I'm maybe paraphrasing, but the whole problem with the world is that fools and fanatics are always so certain of themselves, while wiser men so full of doubts. And man, if that's not what we're dealing with today, I don't know what is. But we're also going to talk about some interesting updates on the Shifa hospital. Gareth Porter, writing for Consortium News, always somebody you should be listening to. Very, very well respected on pretty much any side of this, whether it's corporate media or anywhere else. Sort of like a Robert Fisk kind of character in a good way. I mean, in the sense where he has a very long history in journalism. And because he, I guess, in my opinion, continued telling the truth, the corporate media acts like he's some sort of like pariah, to some degree. Same like with Robert Fisk when he exposed what was going on in Syria. Suddenly he's this like sort of conspiracy theory straddling person that we don't acknowledge anymore. It's just, again, everybody sees it. And we're going to talk about what he's finding and the research he's showing that basically exposes that the IDF at least claimed they already found a headquarters, and then pretended that wasn't happening to make you think that Shifa was, because they want to go after these hospitals. I mean, I'm going to go through his reporting, and he's a very well-respected journalist. And it's just, again, I don't think you need to be convinced. I think it's very obvious, but it's collapsing in front of them. We're going to go over the ceasefire conversation, what has happened so far, what I believe, and I think is very obvious, is already a violation of the ceasefire. I mean, it's not hard to see when one side is firing that the ceasefire has been broken, but we'll go through what's going on here and what's happening and who's been released and where this seems to be going. But really importantly, I'm going to, as I've said this pretty much every time nowadays, I'm going to try to get this done in a shorter period of time because I want to. I know a lot of you like the longer ones because I want the end part of the show to not get lost in the mix. We're going to finish today with some really powerful information coming from corporate media, from the United Nations, from basically every angle, showing you not only that that Israeli government has been detaining children and adults and anybody else illegally, administrative detention, indefinite detention with no crime, no charge, children, women, everybody, long before this, pretty much entirely since they've existed, and well past October 7th. And the egregious amount of illegal action, torture, all cited by mainstream media even today, which doesn't mean that makes it real, obviously, but groups like, as we pointed out, Amnesty International, the United Nations. And who are the people claiming that's just not true? Well, people like Ben Shapiro, people like Biden, telling you that's fake news and you're a racist as you're looking at the facts. And I don't mean because UN stated it. I mean because it's coming from Israeli reports that admitted to in the past, things like the neighbor procedure in other conversations. And yet you're racist if you think that's true. It's just not working anymore. Because arguably was never actually true. Not that there's not racist people, but when you're arguing someone is racist because you're talking about something that they don't want you talking about, the only reason that ever had power is because those people were powerful. And I think we're watching that power diminish, which is why they're pushing so hard and why people are so afraid about the shifting dynamic. But without wasting any more time, let's get into the opening about some medical freedom points that I really wanted you guys to see. First of all, Dr. Peter McCullough put this out, and I just wanted to reiterate this. You guys do not need to be informed about this, but a new study from July 6th, new-ish from 2023, a systematic review of autopsy findings in deaths after COVID-19 vaccination. I've shown you at least 4 studies, I think 3 or 4, that have gone over autopsies, and it is unparalleled. Spike protein all over the body. And the very first one we ever showed you, they found spike protein in every organ in the body. I mean, I don't want to take too long on this because we've gone so far through all of this. My point is another study finding the same kind of information. And the point is, as Dr. Peter McCullough says, until government authorities can explain the dramatic rise in all-cause mortality among the vaccinated by some other explanation, because understand, they have not given any other argument. Hypotheticals, sure. I shouldn't say no other argument, no other valid excuse or a justification. There's all sorts of theories, but they haven't said, here's what this is. So his point is, we don't know, but all of the evidence, well, that's what they're saying, all the evidence points in one very clear direction. You know what that is. And they just omit it. It's like the VAERS information. Well, we just pretend that's not there, and we're baffled by it. Well, they love just leaving it like that. How long have I been saying that? Long before COVID-19. We'll leave it up there, and we'll figure it out. We think it could be worse, right? We've talked about that a lot. And then just let it ride out like that forever. Because it's not worse, is the point. But it says it is and of course, what I'm saying right there is the context about some new variant being more transmissible, but might be more deadly. And then it just stays like that for a year. Well, did you ever figure out if it was more deadly? Well, it might be. It might be. Well, that means it's not. Well, usually. Anyway, but back to the point. It is the COVID-19 vaccine as the cause of death until proven otherwise. That is not his opinion. I mean, it is his opinion, but that's not stated as that's what I think we should be doing. What he's talking about is basic. The bottom line is even in a medical field specifically, the point is if you have this much evidence pointing in this direction, it's not haphazard to say we think this is the reality until proven otherwise. This is just how much the tipping point is shown. The body of evidence is so overwhelmingly one direction that that's what we should be doing. Same with collapsing athletes. There's just no other obvious reality. So we should be, as investigators, as journalists, as doctors, should be looking into this as this is the likely culprit until we can prove it's something else. And they will never do that. Because right now they're desperately trying to avoid jail time for every other agenda they're throwing in your face, let alone the most obvious, whatever you want to call whatever the COVID-19 illusion was. There's so many words that could be used. But this is coming from this Spectator article. Excess mortality and COVID vaccination. Is there a correlation? Like even that article alone, even asking the question, even if the article goes on to say, no, it's not, even asking that question is a huge breach for the narrative. Can you imagine still pretending like this doesn't add up? Almost identical high vaccination rate to high excess mortality in the countries that don't. It's just baffling to me. Now, the Defender puts out a great article from the 21st. Young people dying of cancer at explosive rates, according to new government data. But you know what? They're baffled, guys. We're just baffled. Obviously, I think we know what clearly this is, and there's a lot of other culprits that could add to it. I don't think any of this is just one thing, to be clear. Because let's understand, we are being drenched in things that cause cancer today. They do not care. In fact, they go out of their ways to cover up things like what Norfolk Southern did with the help of the government, or what they're doing to people in the high north, what they're doing all over the world, your drinking water, the PFAS, the military. They do not care about you. They love to make you think that, so your neighbor yells at you for trying to stop the thing that they're doing that hurts you all because they think they're fighting for freedom. The point is that they know what they're doing. At the very least, it's malfeasance. They couldn't care less as long as it benefits them. I know that is hard for some people to understand, but if you just can't look around at what your life is like today and what they're doing and their lack of concern for the things that clearly matter to the vast majority of Americans, then you don't want to see it. My point is that this is about many things. Like we could talk about the EMF, the 5G aspect. We could talk about the endocrine disrupting chemicals or any number of things in our food, right? But the injection that is clearly rapidly increasing cancers, and the turbo cancer conversation is not some fake story. So many of these things get dismissed out of hand because people have yet to dive back in and seen the peer-reviewed science finding the obvious issue. And whether we're talking about the DNA contamination, whether we're talking about any number of aspects that I personally have gone through on my show, and plenty of other independent media have, that verifiably lead to an increase in cancer or cancer-esque type problems in your body. I mean, it's literally everywhere. My point is that this is obvious and we can see what the culprit is, but all the other things they're doing too are adding to it, which leads me to the next part. This is coming from military.com. U.S. military says national security depends on forever chemicals. Great. So now they're pitting your health against your safety. Is that really the reality? No, not even remotely. To pretend like they need to keep poisoning you to keep you safe, isn't that counterintuitive? Isn't that an oxymoron? It's sort of like doing really dangerous things for your safety. Well, look at that. That seems to be their go-to. Don't worry, we're going to give you a super dangerous shot to keep you safe from something that doesn't exist. We're going to keep you safe. Don't worry, we're going to keep making lots of things that produce a lot of dangerous cancer-causing chemicals to keep you safe from the problems we're creating over there that make you less safe. But yeah, just shut up about it. You'll be fine. Right, because their military is not keeping you safe if you understand the reality of the world. The alarming part of this, guys, is that this is something that they've been denying and ignoring and pushing off forever. And this is how it goes, isn't it? Fake, fake, fake. Oh, but now we need it. Stop talking about it. So it wasn't actually fake then? Stop talking about it. Yeah, see, it was always there. They always knew it was going on. And this ties directly back to things like East Palestine. Remember? The story we discussed where they were very clearly ignoring the fact that there was a huge PFAS problem as well as the dioxins. Well, more so the other way around, dioxins as well as PFAS. They did not care. And you know why they didn't care? Because I don't think they wanted us asking these kind of questions because they already knew why they needed this to keep going. As in the military, I mean. Because you realize there have been groups and NGOs and activist groups screaming about PFAS for decades. That's why they don't want you talking about it. This is why we laugh when all of a sudden, after East Palestine and everything else, all of a sudden, breaking news, the corporate media, exposure to PFAS or forever chemicals can reduce your fertility by 40%. 40%. My God. And we just went right back to sleep, didn't we? Oh, well, that's the story. Back to this news. Go ahead. I mean, how can you read something or even, that doesn't mean that it's absolutely the case just because the study says so. But think about this. The corporate media telling you the things that are basically all over, and your military is telling you we have to keep producing rapidly to keep you safe, could reduce your fertility by 40%, and we just don't even bat an eye? My God, that's wild. Here is one of the ones we talked about, EPA forcing Ohio toxic waste on facilities that aren't even able to process either dioxins or PFAS. And remember, we proved this. We called the locations. We had them on the record. In an honest world, that would have ended the conversation. Right? People that do things like that used to win awards. Not today. Not today. You get censored. That's how it works. Here, Clean Harbors is the other one. The Clean Harbors Waste Disposal Ohio scandal. Actually, this is both Clean Harbors, but the point was they kept doing it. Just crazy, isn't it? Now, on some other news, getting into some foreign policy, Legal Man makes a great point. I haven't even touched on this story because it's so funny how the partisanship attacks these kind of stories where all of a sudden there's a car on the border in Canada and it exploded and everyone's like terror attack. And the other group's like, no, it's not. And then each one calls the other one a shill and a liar because the story goes the other way. It's just so silly. And my point is, in this case, there's a lot of people when they said this wasn't a terror attack that said they're hiding the fact that this is some kind of immigrant attack. Because that's where the right mind is, right? Where on the left side, anyway, you get the point. I more likely think exactly what Legal Man is, or I do think what Legal Man here is presenting. The idea that for whatever reason, this wasn't pushed forward, but this was already beginning to be stated, things like this. Iranian passport found near the car that exploded. The point is that this is the kind of flimsy, ridiculous propaganda, like the passport from 9/11 that just seems to push the agenda. But I think it's interesting the way that we engage with this from a two-party paradigm sense. I'm genuinely curious how many people are still in and invest their lives in the two-party illusion. I still think it's less than 50%. I think it's been going down rapidly. But let's call that wishful thinking for now. Business Insider. The Pentagon is moving toward letting artificial intelligence weapons autonomously decide to kill humans. It's almost like this is becoming, I don't even know there's not even a word good. This is, to use Steve's, let's call it cartoonish. Like the idea that we could make every single movie ever about a dystopian future that involves technology starting just like this. And it's like, not that means it's going to go this direction, but I mean, it's not even that far-fetched from people that are experts in artificial intelligence. There's plenty of people that I don't even trust, but the bottom line of people that have said, this is dangerous. This could get out of hand. The artificial intelligence could see people as a threat. I mean, it's not that far-fetched. So this would be the moment where you look back and go, yep, that's where we push that over the line. The moment you let AI make decisions about when it kills humans. Now, of course, we're not talking about sentient AI just yet, or that's what we're told anyway. I don't believe. I think I think they're more likely going to lie to us about the fact that it's aware. But then they could kill people and blame it on AI. Either way this goes, this is a terrifying step that they're discussing. I don't think anybody outside of military and government want this, but they always pretend like we're going to debate this because we care. No, they've made the decision 10 years ago. They just like you to think they're debating as, it's the same thing like we talk about with, going to war in general. You take any poll anywhere from any paradigm, nobody wants more war. And they always pretend like somebody does. And they debate it. Do we want it? They want you to think your opinion matters. Now, on the point of getting into foreign policy, Salman Ahmed points out Elon Musk is now visiting Israel as he puts it, for a propaganda meeting. Quite frankly, I agree. This is concerning, and I hope this does not impact censorship on Twitter. This is the correspondent for N12 News. Officials in Israel are preparing for a visit by Elon Musk. He's expected to meet with the Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu and President Isaac Herzog. You know, the one who's lied many, many, many times along with Netanyahu, but fake chemical weapons allegations, Mein Kampf, all the different things they've floated, which they haven't even gone back to. Like, we can't acknowledge that. And visit the villages attacked by Hamas. Right. So you're going to go on the propaganda tour, right? You're going to walk him through the kibbutz area, the different places, and you're going to tell him what he's supposed to be seeing, how that works, despite the fact that we already know. I mean, but who knows? I mean, you know my opinion of where this all goes and what Elon seems to play in this larger role, but who knows? Maybe he'll come back and say something different. I certainly hope so. Just like I said with Trump, I always hope you're all right about it. I just don't think the same thing, quite frankly, but should he come back with some kind of perception about this as they show him the screening they've been showing people, I'll get to in a minute, even though most or some of that has already been shown to be false or old and so on, who knows what that might change. But the idea that he's going to go on some tour through Israel just seems like a little bit of a one-sided game, doesn't it? But we'll see what happens. On that note, I will leave you before we jump into the main topic with a couple of important articles that came out today. Derek Bros put this out. Who owns your children? The government keeps acting like it does. This is an important article about, we all sense, whether we're talking about the transgender conversation or anything else, whether going back a long time to one that was really important to me at the time, chemotherapy, where children were being taken from their parents because they didn't want to give them the wildly dangerous chemotherapy that shouldn't be given to anybody, in my opinion. But this kind of stuff is constant. And now we saw it during COVID-19 with the injection. They know better, right? As he points it, they keep saying our children. Are they our children? No, they're my children. I don't have any, but in the sense of a parent. But it's about parental rights. It's a very important article about where this seems to be going, and bringing this into the conversation today. Robert put out an excellent article called "Did Israel Really Create Hamas?" Now, I might go through this in more depth and a focus on this, but it's a great article. The bottom line here is it's obvious and undeniable that Israel and the United States have influence from the earliest days, in my opinion, on what this is. Now, that does not mean, as I've said in the show before, that they physically made up every single thing about them. But my point, as I've said and I made clear on a previous show about created, I still arguably believe, I believe that they arguably took something like they have in any other situation and made it into what it had become. Not that they created it from nothing. Right? There's a difference there. But there's created arguably means from inception. But I still think it's important to understand that the embodiment that is Hamas that took place from even before 2006, but whenever we argue that there might have been a change, if that actually happened in regards to supporting Palestine more than the surreptitious Israel agenda, I do think that there's a very clear involvement from everything that they became, because it ties back to Israel and the United States. I think that's very obvious. But again, I think it's important that you guys always understand that, and I should say, by the way, pretty much everything he says in this article is what we've been saying. But it's important to know that I pride myself, and now that Carrie's doing it as editing as well, that we don't just publish what we think is the truth, or rather than what we think is my opinion, I should say. It's important to know that we allow our writers to cover what they believe based on the facts. Right? So it's always based on the facts, but it's the same thing I say about Matt's articles. Sometimes our writers will put something out that I'm like, well, the facts I agree with, but the conclusion, maybe I think a little bit different. But I just think it's so interesting. Most people don't know that most platforms, everything kind of funnels through the leadership, as opposed to allowing the writers, who are the actual talent, in my opinion, to express what they believe. It's just fascinating, isn't it? And I think that's one of the reasons why I was so, a long time ago, wanted to get into this, because I wanted that difference. I don't like the controlled structure of how most of this stuff works. On that note, though, make sure you read this, because understanding the reality of how influential Israel has been in what Hamas has been used as, I mean, it's powerful. And I'll make a point about that in a minute. Now, if you haven't seen the updates, it's horrifying. This is from today. Gaza death toll from Israeli attacks tops 14,800. 14,800. 6,150 children, 4,000 women. That's just, it's grotesque. It's obscene. And we're going to get into the numbers in a minute about either the breadth of this, understanding the history and understanding comparatively to any other war, let alone genocide. it's just, this is unprecedented. And people keep trying to act like just comparing blunt numbers to other things. It's about the small area and it's about the time frame. We're talking what, 48 days? Enough munitions that are more than 2 nuclear bomb or atom or whatever the comparison was. I think it was 2 the size bombs like from Japan, like Hiroshima style things. Just based on the amount of munitions they've dropped in this small area. I mean, this is from experts that know what they're talking about. I mean, I'm not a munitions expert, but it's obvious what we can see happening there is beyond the pale. It's the kind of thing that one thing we're going to get into today that, in my opinion, they were so worried about allowing this to happen, the exchange or the ceasefire, because there's a time now for reporters to go in and look at what's been happening. Look at the bodies littering the streets in the areas they were told were safe. There's just no way to misunderstand that. You can't just keep yelling the word Hamas every time you see anybody killed anywhere. Because sure, you could make an argument, but at some point you begin to see that there's no way this could all add up. And I think that's why everybody's seeing through it, including the corporate media. And realize that doesn't mean everybody in every corporate media position is somehow knowingly dishonest or involved in the lie. I think they're all pliable because they wouldn't be in those positions if they weren't able to be like that, sort of the manufacturing consent point. But I think I see a lot of these people that are just not aware that they're being used the way they are and their humanity is shining through at this point when they're going like, that's why we're seeing people get censored. Even Haaretz, as we'll get into, is now being censored by the Israeli military. Now, this is Caitlin Johnstone making a great point before we get into these opening points, or rather the point I just made there about Haaretz. Putin was declared a war criminal for relocating the same number of children Israel just killed. Now, whether or not you feel this was kidnapping or human trafficking, even though it's very obvious because it was reported even by the Western press that it was almost all the parents were involved gave their permission. There were just some that later were like worried about what happened. The point is that Russia ultimately moved a bunch of children out of the war zone. And it was followed up on by Western press. These children were not taken somewhere and never to be seen again. They were in nice locations. They were given food. Of course, the Western press just framed it as kidnapping. But let's just pretend they stole 6,000 children. She says it's probably worth noting at this point in history, the total number of children killed in Gaza just surpassed the number of children. The International Criminal Court indicted Russian President Putin for relocating out of a war zone. A recent estimate by Gaza authorities puts the number of Palestinian children killed by Israel's bombing campaign over the last 7 weeks at just above 6,000. The number comes from the Gaza Media Office, which basically the argument here is that, remember, I think there's something like 1,200 more that they believe are probably under the rubble. And because their entire systems have been collapsed due to the lack of necessities and the bombing, they're not even sure. They believe it's more, is the point. In the March of this year, ironically, on the 20th anniversary of the U.S. invasion of Iraq, the ICC, the International Criminal Court, judges issued a arrest warrant charging Putin with a war crime in Ukraine. The allegations were for unlawful deportation of some 6,000 Ukrainian children to a network of re-education camps in Russia, or at least that's how it was framed. I quite frankly can prove to you that's not the way that went down, unless even what the Western media followed up on was also not true. Certainly possible. As the Gray Zone documented at the time, the ICC charges were based on a Yale HLR report, which is rife with contradictions, plot holes, and the fairly significant conflict of interest of being funded by the U.S. State Department. Shocking. The report itself acknowledges that it found no documentation of child mistreatment. Okay, that's their report. So arguably now we're just talking about, trafficking to the point where no one's been mistreated. Now understand, we're erring on the side of let's assume that bad was being done here, as opposed to just trying to help these children from the war zone and the neo-Nazi organizations that were hurting everybody in Ukraine. But it says the report, so no mistreatment, and that nearly all of the children were returned to their families in a timely manner. This is coming from their report. But and again, these are things we've reported in the past, even if these points were all false and Putin did just illegally kidnap 6,000 children, would that be worse than murdering them by dropping powerful military explosives on areas known to be packed full of children? Why is one a war crime and the other apparently fine? You guys already know why. Russia is no more a party to the ICC's Rome Statute than Israel is, after all. A recent United Nations report says that since the 7th of October, when Hamas fighters attacked Israel, 67% of more than 14,000 people killed were estimated to be women and children. That's been coming down from the United Nations, from everybody. If we assume it's at an even 1,400 and make the obscenely generous assumption that every single one of the men killed by Israel were Hamas combatants, 67% puts the total number of women and children killed at 9,380 in just 7 weeks of bombing. In the 21 months of the war in Ukraine, the UN estimates that the number of civilians killed at around 10,000. 21 months in a much, much larger area with more people. The total number of children killed, you ready? 560. 21 months of supposedly the worst war criminal terrorist in the world, Mr. Putin, who they tell you they just want to murder everybody and kill children because that's what they are. And apparently with this onslaught for 21 months, 560 children, according to everyone, anybody that would tell people that hate Russia and want to frame them as the bad guy. And yet we're watching 6,000 in 48 days. And we're just not even comparable. Obviously, you understand what's happening here. The numbers show that Israel is plainly behaving in a way that is far, far more murderous and criminal in Gaza than Russia is in Ukraine. But we good and faithful members of the international community are meant to desire only the Russia leader's prosecution at The Hague. Really, she says, quote, international law does not exist in a meaningful way, which is why powerful governments always just ignore it, while the people who are actually detained by the ICC are always from weaker nations, overwhelmingly African. Now, I would disagree to a small point there. It's not necessarily, it's sort of like your constitutional rights. It's not like they don't exist because they don't acknowledge or acknowledge them. It's that they're the one who has power enough to be able to step right over them. It's the point being is that, and I'm not saying international law is an inherent concept, but I'm saying that in the concept of constitutional rights, as we understand as Americans, it's a God-given inherent concept, whether or not they ever wrote that piece of paper down. My point here is that I believe that we've come to understand a level of international law that applies whether or not, like the idea being, sovereignty, the idea of human rights, the idea of basic things, right? So whether or not they acknowledge them or act within them or only apply them to their adversaries, they still exist. I just want that to be clear, because there's people out there that act like because they treat that way, that therefore it's okay when other people do bad things because, it doesn't even exist. Well, that's almost allowing them to do what they want, right? And that's not what she's saying, by the way. But it goes on to say, perhaps nothing better exemplifies this dynamic than the U.S. government's American Service Members Protection Act, better known as the Hague Invasion Act. Remember, the Hague is an international court where you can charge people for international crimes. This 2002 law authorizes the use of military force to liberate any U.S. or U.S. allied military personnel from any international criminal court attempt to prosecute them for war crimes. That's what it looks like to be a war criminal. So you literally pass laws to stop your fellow military actors from being charged with those crimes, despite some of the worst, most egregious wars full of war crimes being committed by the West, predominantly the U.S. government. And in the sense of in the living memory, as far as I'm concerned, from an American standpoint, from our government, you can go back very far and find far, far worse. When you get the point. The bottom line is that if you have people like Bolton or Pompeo who are threatening the families of these people, and they have laws that say that you can't even charge us, while they then use this against other people, how do we not see? And I always end like that. We do see it. I believe we all see it. But for those that can't, how can you not see who the villain is in this conversation when they're the ones carrying out war crimes and finding ways to make sure they can't be accountable for them? That doesn't mean they're the only villain. Quite frankly, I find all governments to be villains. But the point is, we need to see the top of the pyramid here. In truth, it says, she finishes, in truth, our world is ruled by tyrants who do whatever they want to do. And their actions are justified by the mass media who function as propagandists for the U.S. centralized power structure. Right? As Immortal Technique calls them, the fourth branch. They're part of the government. Pundits weep and rend their garments over Russian crimes while defending, minimizing, obfuscating the far greater crimes of Israel, because Israel is a part of that globe-spanning power structure while Russia is not. Well, and I quite frankly disagree with that framing, but she's making a good point. She says, I have never been particularly interested in defending the Russian government. What I'm interested in is opposing the murderousness of the globe spanning power structure, the so-called international rules-based order. And she says that I live under and all the lies, double standards, and hypocrisy used to keep these murderers going. Yeah, see, this is Putin was declared a war criminal for relocating. That's her article right there. Now, just one of the points that she made. Here is the United Nations relief chief telling you, and it's a 13-minute clip on CNN, crazy enough. You can hear him say the worst ever, asking about the death and destruction in Gaza specifically, quote, the worst ever. And I don't say that lightly, he says. 68% of the people killed in Gaza are women and children. He says, no, I don't think I've seen anything like this before. It's complete and utter carnage. I mean, how are we even debating this anymore? It's absolutely unparalleled. And just a quick video from The Guardian, which again, I'm never going to pretend like these platforms are in your interest. Corporate media is not on your side. They're doing this for their benefit or their interest. Now, what that might be, that's what we need to ask ourselves. Why are they doing this? I do not believe it's in the interest of the truth. But for whatever, as I've said many times, not very often, but every now and again, the truth aligns with their interests. Here is just so you can understand just a quick glance of what Gaza was before and what it is now. And it's not because of Hamas. It's just so sad. It's like they really want everyone to think that these are all just bustling terror zones. It's just so sad. These were people's homes, people's businesses. The university. It wasn't the podcast, it's just showing the different locations. And these are, we've gotten only one or two arguments about Hamas being present at Al-Shifa. It's just, and the rest are just assumed. People online just going, well, there's probably Hamas there. Yeah. Don't you think we should make sure we prove that when you're destroying an entire civilization here? It's unbelievable. Look at this one. Gone. And, one of the main points people are making is like, there's no argument that this is all because of some underground tunnel or some infrastructure. This is just indiscriminate in the sense of like, not that they're not, you could call it both ways really, but the idea being that this is directed at Palestine. And let's not forget, they have said that. The security minister just put this out saying, no, we're not at war with Gaza. We're at war with Palestine. Right? All of it. They said the U.S. believes there's two groups. There's terrorists and innocent people. That's not true. He wrote an entire op-ed about it. And we still debate that they're trying to precision strike Hamas as they tell you it's about destruction, not accuracy. It's embarrassing. And they're still pushing, though. Well, here, let's get into some of the lies. It's a great video that I want to play through. It's called How Israel Lies About Literally Everything. And it goes into the reality of their Hasbara campaign, the way it engages, and why it's inherently dishonest.
Following breaking news out of the Middle East, Israeli Defense Forces say
the Israeli military says Hamas,
as Israel says it targeted tunnels and weapons manufacturing sites.
Israel says
we spoke with the international spokesperson from the IDF, Richard Hecht.
Israeli authorities say
the Israelis say
Israel says
Israel's defense forces saying
Israel saying
that's according to the Israeli military.
Israel says
every single time. But over in Israel, prominent journalists stopped believing the military years ago. Back in 2015, Gideon Levy would write a scathing article in the Israeli Haaretz saying, quote, The policy of denial and disconnection from reality is rising to a dangerous level, and the illness is getting worse. Israel further entrenches itself in its imaginary reality. It's all just a matter of hasbara, the Israeli euphemism for propaganda. Now, the term hasbara has its nuances. Hasbara is one of those wacky Israeli words that defy translation, but as senior Haaretz correspondent Anshel Pfeffer maintains, hasbara is simply the act or profession of explaining. Even going so far as to say, hasbara is now one of the basic tenets of 21st century Zionism. Indeed, many Israeli media outlets and think tanks are comfortable with this official-sounding interpretation. And in fact, hasbara is a fully codified institution within the Israeli government. After the 2006 Lebanon War, the so-called hasbara apparatus underwent a massive overhaul, which included the creation of a government office dedicated solely to hasbara, the National Hasbara Headquarters within the Office of the Prime Minister. Its many arms extend to the Foreign Ministry, the Ministry of Diplomacy and Diaspora Affairs, the Ministry of Tourism, the Jewish Agency for Israel, and notably the IDF Spokespersons Division, the propaganda arm of the Israeli military, tasked with operating the IDF's official website and blog, YouTube channel, Twitter, and other social media accounts. Hasbara is identified as not only a state diplomacy infrastructure, but also a cultural phenomenon. Nicholas Lehman of the Columbia Journalism School once described the propensity of so-called people of the book for disputations over text. Indeed, hasbara appears to be distinctly steeped in religious fundamentalism. Just take the current head of the Israeli hasbara apparatus, public diplomacy minister Distal Atbarian, whose plans for the future include denying that an Israeli occupation exists and that the Bible is the Jewish people's deed to the land. Other responsibilities as hasbara minister will doubtless include overseeing hasbara operations, the purpose of which being to facilitate the synchronization of Israel's narratives, especially during wartime. For this reason, official military communiques have earned the ire of even seasoned Israeli journalists. The state authorities have acquired for themselves a shady reputation when it comes to their credibility. And it's not only journalists, by the way, but also the IDF's very own Major General Yitzhak Brick, who complained that the military suffered from a, quote, culture of lying. In a stunning expose, Brick described within the IDF a culture of lies, whitewashing, squaring circles, concealing information, and coordinating testimonies of those involved before military police investigations begin.
That's very important for the part about the exchange today, because you're going to see a part where they're discussing how these people they are required to go through interrogation. That's the word they used. Two different versions of interrogation before they can be released. We're talking about the people that they're taking back from Gaza. So that's exactly why, in my opinion, they need to make very sure that the information comes out in a very controlled way. Because I think we know why, especially since the first people they've released challenged everything they said about what Hamas was doing.
After Hamas was elected to power in Gaza in 2007, the US government sought to stage a coup with the full backing of Israel. They failed. After which, Egypt brokered a ceasefire, which Israel violated in November of 2008 by staging a cross-border raid, which killed 6 Hamas officials. Despite breaking the ceasefire, Israel formally justified the attack by saying it was in self-defense against rocket attacks.
Sound familiar? I actually believe that almost already happened, and for some reason it didn't get used. I'll show you what I mean by that. I've made the argument about claiming that a rocket was fired without even any evidence of it, and then acting on that regard. They already sounded the sirens right before this without anything happening, which, by the way, they do all the time to keep people in fear. But I will get into it in a minute. But I think they almost did that and then decided not to, essentially.
In the air campaign that ensued, part of the IDF's so-called Operation Cast Lead, 3,000 sorties dropped over 1,000 tons of explosives. And, despite Israeli denials, among the weapons were cluster munitions and incendiary white phosphorus bombs. Mark Garlasco, former chief of high-value targeting at the Pentagon, who later worked with Human Rights Watch, would describe his frustration when investigating Israeli forces. They said in Lebanon they did not use cluster bombs. We found 4 million.
Right, so explain for me why they would deny using them then, but now they act like they're completely legal. Because the narratives have shifted. They've just pushed it so long that they now act like when they use them, it's okay, as usual.
Evade answering that they use phosphorus, and we stand there every day watching. How can anyone trust the Israeli military? And though official Israeli statements were replete with falsehoods, a culmination of the Hezbollah apparatus, the State of Israel employed other covert means to push their narrative. In Operation Cast Lead, we turned to Jewish communities abroad, and with their help, we recruited several thousand volunteers, said Ilan Stolman, who is Deputy Director of the Information Department at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, a key fixture of the Hezbollah infrastructure. In an interview with the Calcalist paper, Stolman answered questions about a new professional team of comment writers who will flood websites around the world with pro-Israeli messages.
That's happening right now in an incredibly obvious way.
And who will participate in discussions about Israel on blogs around the world and on websites such as Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. Twitter, in particular, would receive, quote, round-the-clock activity. In a pattern that would be repeated in the future, the ministry would recruit educated young people who speak foreign languages and use social media. Our people won't say, hello, I'm from the Ministry of Foreign.
I'm battling those guys every day. At least that's what I think. I can just sense when it's like, anyway.
Foreign Affairs, nor will they necessarily identify themselves as Israelis. They will speak as citizens and write responses that will appear personal, but will be based on a pre-prepared list of messages compiled by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. In 2013, the Prime Minister's office would deploy so-called covert units of their own to Israeli universities. Taking to Facebook and Twitter, and also not disclosing that they were working for the government, these units would be set up in a, quote, semi-military fashion, with a student senior coordinator whose tuition would be covered in exchange for their participation. The other students working under them would also receive partial scholarships. The next year, Israel would launch yet another war on Gaza, this time called Operation Protective Edge. After 3 Israeli teenagers were captured and executed by Palestinian militants in 2014, the Israeli military launched a fake rescue mission despite knowing that the boys were already dead, an excuse to make mass arrests. The massive air war that ensued destroyed 18,000 homes in Gaza and killed thousands of people.
Now, that's exactly what we're talking about when it comes to collective punishment, right? No one's arguing that the people that hurt those boys shouldn't be held accountable, but to just indiscriminately kill and bomb, and that's what we're doing. That's what we're doing today. They've always done this. For those that haven't seen this topic before October 7th, this has been an ongoing process. That's why we're going to get into what they've always been saying. The United Nations, Amnesty International, just egregious violations of human rights, international law, long before October 7th.
In one of the most devastating consequences of Israeli lies via Hezbollah in recent memory. To use one example which is emblematic of the whole 2014 war, the only rehabilitation center in Gaza, Al-Wafa Hospital, was completely destroyed in the bombing. To justify the attack, Israel tweeted a fake photo alleging to show a rocket being fired from the hospital. But
sounding familiar?
According to Amnesty International, the image tweeted by the Israeli military does not match satellite images of the Al-Wafa Hospital and appears to depict a different location.
Isn't it incredible that this can happen then and it just carries forward? It's because the governments and the media are all playing their part. I still argue people were seeing through it then too. Maybe not in as many numbers. Today it's very different, but this is the way it's been. Thank God people are finally starting to see through this.
Such is the nature of the Israeli Hasbara effort, the principal objective being a positive spin on Israeli actions, and as the documentary record shows, the truth is irrelevant. The narrative takes precedent, leading Gideon Levy of Haaretz to go as far as to call Israeli Hasbara a brainwashing campaign, which has enjoyed dazzling success in Israel. And disseminating Hasbara to an international audience is critical to shaping that narrative. During the bombing of Gaza in 2021, Israeli officials briefed thousands of journalists. In just one day, the IDF foreign media spokesman briefed 180 journalists.
Thinking the screenings, right? This is what we're talking about. You invite only the ones you know are going to basically toe your line. They didn't invite Al Jazeera or anybody else. Of course, they just want the people that are going to blindly take what they're saying and report it. That's what this is. That's why they bring in the special screenings. They don't release it to you, of course, because then we'll be able to poke holes in it. They just want them to go, here's what I saw and here's how I know. And that carries with a lot of people.
With the advent of TikTok as well, the State of Israel saw another opportunity, and their official TikTok account gained tens of thousands of followers over the course of the conflict. In fact, according to a recent investigation from Haaretz, the State of Israel pulled out all of the stops, even waging a psychological warfare campaign against its own citizens, illegal under Israeli law. Undertaken by the IDF spokesperson's unit, the operation sought not to downplay Israeli war crimes or spin them, but to play them up. Using fake social media accounts in order to conceal their military source, IDF officers uploaded images and video of Israeli airstrikes and tried to make the hashtag Gaza Regrets go viral. The disproportionate destruction of Gaza has its negative consequences on Israeli Hezbollah efforts, as described by former Hezbollah chief Yarden Vadakai. The damage in Gaza is way larger and more dramatic than in Israel. In the world of public opinion, Israel is the stronger side. Palestinians are the weaker side. This is the limitation of Hezbollah. You have to say it frankly. Israel is still hard at work deploying armies of keyboard warriors across the internet, and the architects of the operation are quite open about their efforts. Just in 2022, Israel's deputy foreign minister held a webinar for Hezbollah activists, saying it is focusing on getting information out on social media to apply pressure on conventional media. The so-called online briefing was attended by about 100 participants, including activists and social media influencers. The deputy foreign minister, who at the time was Mr. Idan Roll, spoke very candidly to them about their important role in shaping public perceptions of Israeli military operations, saying that one of the biggest challenges is to fulfill as many operational goals as possible and as quickly as possible before international political pressure requires the country to halt its campaign.
Exactly. And that's what happened today, or in the last so many days. You know, to pretend like they just suddenly have realized they should stop murdering people. No, they got enough pressure to where they realized they had to make, and that's why they're going, we're not going to stop. Here's 4 days. Fine. Do what you're going to do. We're going to kill them right after that. And meanwhile, we're only giving about 5% of what they need. We'll get into the aid they're supposedly sending.
This determines how much breathing space the world gives us to continue hitting our targets, he said. This is where Hezbollah comes in. Hezbollah gives us time and gives us legitimacy to act and protect ourselves. He called social media specifically an instrument to apply pressure on conventional media. That's the name of the game these days.
Also following breaking news out of the Middle East.
Israel says Israeli authorities say.
Hey everyone, thanks so much for watching, and if you enjoyed this video or you feel like you learned something, please consider subscribing.
Here's the account if you guys want to. I'm not very familiar with their work. It's GDF. I'm not sure, but great video. I think it's well done. Which, you know, and important thing to think about here. For those that want to make this all about one group of people in any sense, if you can't see based on this or what we've been discussing and the information that you can prove that Israel and their government are just as much manipulating the Israeli population, Jewish or otherwise, as they are anybody else. And have had far more success in that regard because they have wildly radicalized plenty of people, just like the U.S. government has wildly radicalized far too many people in the party paradigm to be pro-war. But just think about that. Like, let's make sure we do not make this about all Israelis or all Jewish people or all Palestinians. The point is very clearly that we have governments who are actively trying to pit us against ourselves. Always the point. Now, here is what we were going to point the main image of today. Lord Bebo, made this. This is where I saw it first. Israel fakes an arrest and gets exposed. Now, I can't speak to whether Fox is aware of this, but I'll tell you right now, I'll make it when I show you the video. The fact that they are, doing their filming and they get rushed back behind some arbitrary black tarp where they're not allowed to see what's going on while they're in. It's like, what do you think is going on? Why would they put you inside of a tarped area where you can't see when you're in the middle of an open field? Gee, let's use some deductive logic here. Well, why don't I show you why? This is embarrassing. And really, I don't see how anybody could explain this away.
just heard a gunshot, and they're yelling at people to get out of the area. You can see the soldiers. Get down, lay down flat. Lay down totally flat. You can see things are very tense here. There were 2 gunshots, and now they have someone on the ground.
Go back right now.
Very tense right now.
I'll show you this as it gets on the clearer view, but just so you can see. Oh, and they show him walking away. You got the guy with gray underwear.
These soldiers appear to be arresting a Palestinian man. They have him.
Which is what's weird, by the way, is I don't see them put on any kind of a blindfold. It appears as if he's already got like all that stuff on the ground, which would make even more sense that this is a manipulation. But you'll see what I mean when it gets proven.
Tense right now.
So there's a guy on the ground they got, supposedly.
Appear to be arresting a Palestinian man. They have him in handcuffs right now.
I bet you that guy with the orange hat is an American. Just my gut tells me.
They've blindfolded him.
All right, so you get the guy. Okay. Which, by the way, is what they do. Children, anybody, blindfold, just in its own right is pretty disgusting. But that you could obviously see what he looks like, right? Oh, that's a good point. Lord Bebo points out they're immediately taking photographs. That's strange. That's because they're in the middle of a propaganda effort.
And they are taking him away. You can see here. They're leading him away. They've blindfolded this man.
What's going on here? What are you doing now? You weren't behind that fence a second. Are you being driven back behind a fence and they're tarping up the fence? What, as a journalist, do you think that's to protect you from bullets? I mean, what do you think is happening there? You're being put in your free speech zone, which they're happy to oblige.
And it appears they have captured yet another militant who entered from the Gaza Strip. It gives you a sense of just how unpredictable all of this is.
Ridiculous.
They don't know where people are hiding.
What do you think the purpose is of that? Here, you're being brought out. Film this. Okay, now back in your hole. Now wait for us to let you know when you can film something again. Great journalism.
And they could still be in the tree lines here near.
Okay, you can see the IDF in the background trying to pull this down. What I mean, what do you think is happening? You understand, they're not in some active hot zone. Like their argument is they have remnants of people that are still roaming around the area, but I don't even think that's true. Either way, the point is you're not in Gaza, you're in Israel proper. So it's not like they're worried they're going to get shot from something. You are literally blocking their view. You want to come out and film? Now get back behind the block. That's ridiculous. You should be embarrassed with yourself.
The Gaza border.
Okay, look at that. You see the guy right there behind him?
Gaza border.
Right there. What does that look like to you? And it'll be clear in a second. That's that same guy, while he's still talking, putting his pants back on. No blindfold. Right there. Because that's supposed to be blocked by this black tarp. And then, of course, they rush up and go, whoa, stop, go look over there. How ridiculous. How ridiculous. Right, you can see the blindfold on the ground next to him.
I spoke with a senior commander just after that who confirmed this was indeed a Palestinian militant who crossed from Gaza.
Confirmed, because he said so. Israel said.
Or who was here since the massacre on Saturday. They'll certainly investigate what happened in.
Of course, see, they want to see the way he said that. Now it makes you wonder, oh, they're still breaking through. No, that's not what's happening.
Question that man that they found in the woods, but a very tense situation at that site.
Yeah, good catch, Lord Bobo. Good catch. Here, this is their video. This is from Sky News Australia that posted Fox's video. I mean, you tell me that's not the clearest thing you could possibly see. Look at that. That's the most obvious thing in the world. You can see the blindfold. He's literally putting his pants back on. Do you think they would do that with an IDF or for the Palestinian in any sense, let alone after what just happened? And then they rush up going, stop filming, stop filming. Do you think anyone's going to correct this, Fox or anybody? Which shows you who they really are. My God, that's ridiculous. Oh, I think I just had it open twice. So it's obvious as it's ever anything I've ever seen that they've lied about this, staged this, rushed them back behind their blocked area, and the thing flipped up in the wind and they got caught. Unbelievable. Now, just to include, for those that haven't seen these, I'll include this again. Allegations of rape, the whole thing have been even though the Times of Israel have been forced to admit that they don't have the evidence because they didn't do the forensic in time. And as plenty of other people have pointed out, many of the arguments they're making about specifically people that were abused so hard that their pelvic bone broke and so on. Well, that's easily proven. Where's that information? That's not slipping away with time. But no, none of that's been put because I believe, quite frankly, that's obviously that they're lying. Not that Hamas is not capable of that or anybody in a wartime situation for that matter, or that it couldn't happen in any circumstance, I mean. But here's the point on this. Israel got caught. I think Max Blumenthal's the one that found this, using an old image. And I specifically make it clear, this is a website that has been endorsed by Israel's government, that has gotten this information from the Israeli government. This is a lot of what they're screening behind closed doors. And I've already proven that. So this is the same information. Now, this was on there as one of the ones that was, and this has been used from the 7th forward, by mainstream outlets, by Israel, by the IDF themselves. That image is verifiably, well, and by the way, they took it down. And again, the link is right here for you to check out for yourself. Now, I said they took it down. Twitter, in fact, then deleted the old version that we were using to prove that it was old. Violated X rules, does it? You mean, so an image of a woman on her back, a horrifying image, by the way, but is deletable, but all these images of children with their heads blown open, that's okay. I don't believe you. Quite frankly, I think it's very obvious this was deleted because it showed you exactly what was going on. But I was able to find a way back version. So I said, since Twitter deleted the evidence claiming it violated their terms of service, yet allows some of the most horrific images I've ever seen to remain, here's an archived version showing you that this proof was actually from 2022. I've already had people swing back around going, you are a liar. That wasn't really there. Or no, that was a new one and you're lying about that, because now they've deleted it. Somebody seemingly knew it was deleted. They swung back around to go liar. So that was on the record. But guess what? We were able to find it. 2022, March 28th from Twitter. There it is. Right? I mean, it's obvious for those that needed that because I was able to find it. So this is obvious. They lied and they're still using this because I've shown you there's 2 examples. One of these major journalists from, I think, the Jerusalem Post is claiming and explicitly describing this image that he saw it. Right? So we know Israel showed him that in their screening. Then we've got people that claim they were there. I've shown you 2 examples where they're on the record saying that's, I saw a woman on her back with her underwear pulled to the side. Exactly what you're looking at. Claiming that they saw that. Now, how exactly did they see that on October 8th or whenever they went around when it's not actually from 2023? So that's the Hasbara point. They're coaching people on what to say. There's only one explanation there. Now, here's one of those examples. This is Giles Frazier, not very familiar with him. BBC, unheard, says, went to a private IDF screening. Like, don't you think by now that this stuff, after they're the ones claiming we don't trust them and we don't believe, because they're lying. So don't you think by now they would just release this information? I'm willing to bet you my life that the fact that they're not releasing this publicly is because, but first of all, most of it's all the stuff we're already proving, and that's why they won't release it, but because this information is not provable. You're showing them an image of a bloody crib. Here's an image of a burned body, and they give you the context. These people are towing their line. He says he went to the private screening of unfiltered, I'm sure it's not, footage of October 7th earlier tonight, seeing things I can never unsee. No words. But I am going to have to try to find some. Of course, he's going to write an article about this. But this is what we're dealing with. How much you want to bet? He'll cover the rape image and talk about it because he saw it and Israel proved it. Do you need any more proof? It's usually shocking people back from challenging this stuff like you're some kind of bad person. But, if you're a real journalist, the facts are what you should care about the most. And here's another example. They just can't stop doing this. This is from today. Israel's main account. It doesn't matter what language you speak. Supporting women who have been victims of sexual and physical violence should be universal. Completely agree. Assuming we actually have evidence that it happened. Blindly believing any allegation is what started the Me Too movement. Now, look, there were some positive things that came out of actually people like Weinstein realizing that they could eventually actually be held accountable, and then actually being held accountable. That is a positive thing. But there's provable examples of where people were accused of this because of politics. And guess what? At that fervor, people were believe women, right? Kavanaugh. Well, guess what? After that relaxed a little bit and people look back, that was really stupid. Why? Because obviously people can lie. Women or otherwise can absolutely lie, or they could be wrong. They could be motivated by politics, right? Well, guess what? November 24th, 2023, Israel's bringing it back. Believe Israeli women. Like this is not aimed at anybody but you, America. They're trying to manipulate you using these tired ploys. Even though we're all well past that and we're all going to go, well, that's stupid because can't they be wrong? Can't they lie? Has Barra put them to it? Yeah. But they're trying because it's desperate. While there's no evidence to back up the argument that it happened. Not to say that it didn't. As a journalist, an unemotional regard, we haven't proven that. Yeah, and I'm sure we'll go another 4 weeks, another 2 months. They'll keep saying it without proof. But how long do we go until we just argue that they never proved it, which means it didn't happen? And of course, getting into the argument right here that we know that they were involved with killing their own people. So what lengths would they go to cover that up? Quds News Network points out Israel's Minister of Communications has now begun the procedure to shut down Haaretz. Haaretz, by the way, which is a platform that 99% of the time seems to be wildly towing the major lines as anti-patriotic. Why? Because they told you the truth about October 7th. For whatever reason. It's ridiculous, isn't it? It just shows you how desperate this all is. Here is the article, still right there from Haaretz, basically making it clear, even though the headline didn't even say it. The headline made it about some arbitrary point about whether they knew or not the festival was there. It also shows, as it says right there, that a helicopter fired at terrorists also hit people at the festival. It's a fact. It's provable based on the evidence. It's provable based on the fact that helicopter pilots admitted to it, that the security team at Kibbutz Be'eri admitted to it or acknowledged that it happened. Hostages themselves said they were fired at and watched people get shot. I mean, it's how much can we ignore? And now instead of acknowledging that, they're going to get rid of the paper that allowed you to see it. Because that's not the most obvious thing in the world, is it? As I said, since Haaretz dared to report the truth about the IDF killings of Israelis on October 7th, they're now trying to shut this down. And here's our report on October 27th, largely based off the Gray Zone report from that right about that same time, showing that they killed their own citizens on the 7th. I mean, it's a fact. It's undeniable. Here is the same person. This is the communications minister saying the Jerusalem Journalists Association, Guy Learer, other people in general, want us to finance this pro-Palestinian disgrace from our own pockets. It says Haaretz in the English title, commitment of massive crimes against humanity by Israel in the Gaza Strip will lead to, or behind all of this is Israel arrogance. Our thinking is that it is permissible to do anything and that we will never pay and be punished for it. We will be uprooted, eyes smashed. Okay, this is Gideon Levy, who you heard earlier, who is being critical of Israel. So this is a democracy, we're told, and freedom of press. But the moment he says what you don't like, suddenly bring it down. Like, it's flimsy. It's clumsy. Everybody sees you, Israel government. You are absolutely lying, and you are absolutely not what you pretend to be. If you are just removing platforms that challenge what you're saying, then that's not freedom of press. I mean, the same thing's happening in this country to a lesser degree, I guess, or maybe a little bit more of a surreptitious, hidden degree. The point is, that's what's happening. And by the way, it's not just because he's the outlier. That's what Israelis think. They just don't want the American audience to know that that's what seemingly the vast majority of Israelis currently think about their government. This is desperation. They're in damage control right now. It says, in one day, Israel citizens went through what Palestinians have experienced and are experiencing for decades as a routine. Military invasion, death, cruelty, children killed, bodies dumped on the road. Right. So that's not true. Yeah, it is true. They just don't like them being honest about the situation. It says, or an assessment in the security system. Hamas did not know in advance about the festival. That's the one we just pointed to. In the police investigation, it was found that a military helicopter fired at their people. They just don't like you being told that. The fanatical reputation of Hamas, one of the articles reads, are Nazis. The fanatical repetition that Hamas are Nazis came to hide a hidden doubt. All right, so the point is they're calling out all of their lies. Hamas reveled in military resourcefulness. The point is, he says, I think that if they and their ilk are so interested in this disgrace, let them finance it out of their own pockets or not at our expense. What do you think? Right. So just basically stop funding this platform and they will collapse because you don't like that they're telling the truth. It's as simple as that. And more evidence was already come out, largely, I think, why they're trying to bury this as quick as possible. The Cradle reports today is written, and this adds to the bigger story. How many things do we already have? I mean, it's wild. Egypt, multiple. I mean, there's been, I think, at least 5 examples now of very large foreknowledge. Here's another one. A senior officer on the Israeli army labeled a detailed warning ahead of October 7th as an imaginary scenario, according to 2 sources speaking with Financial Times. Sentries on Israel's border with Gaza, many of them female soldiers who watch and analyze a constant feed and other data gathered near the electric fence surrounding the enclave, sent a detailed report weeks before the attack to the highest-ranking intelligence officers. Remember, the one we just discussed was different people that were trying to inform them about things they thought were anomalies, and they were told, if you keep bringing this up, we're going to bring you to trial. Does that sound like an honest engagement if people are trying to protect Israelis? It sounds like someone trying to protect an agenda. The warning report was sent through a secure communication system. It stated Hamas was, get this, training to blow up border posts at several locations, enter Israeli territory, and take over kibbutz. Exactly what we're told happened at the very least. The soldiers also warned that video footage showed that Hamas was practicing taking prisoners. According to what the sources told Financial Times, a high-ranking Israeli officer responded to the warning by saying, this is an imaginary scenario. No action was taken. Israel public broadcasters, KAN, reported details of a similar warning on the 23rd. I mean, this was everywhere. Like, if you want to try to brush this off as just hubris, I guess that's possible. I don't believe it. Neither do people like Efren Fengenson, former intelligence in IDF. None of this adds up. In my opinion, this adds to what we have already thought was the most likely, kind of the middle, right? Where it seems that this was allowed to whatever degree. It was allowed to take place. I still don't think that they expected. Well, let's put it this way. 1 of 2 things. If some of the worst things that happened were done by Hamas, I don't think they expected it would go this way. But if they weren't, it seems to me that they would expected something worse and then carried that out to blame it on them, and this was the plan. Either way, you can't pretend that they have been warned by Egypt, by their own people, 4 or 5 times, and they still just do nothing. And then on the day it happens, it goes on for hours before they do anything. Like, that was allowed, guys. I don't see how we can acknowledge that any different at this point. But to what degree, to what involvement, those are the questions I think were important now. According to the KAN report, low-ranked soldiers warned their superiors of a potential attack, including the possibility of an aircraft being downed or of Hamas raising its flags over Israeli territory. The failure to take action has become a significant issue in the intelligence community as discussions on disciplinary measures are underway. Right. Discipline them for telling you what was going to happen and you ignoring them? Sure sounds like an Israeli government thing to do. Quote, the warnings were dismissed not just because they came from lower-ranking soldiers, but because they ran up against the Israeli government's confidence that it had contained Hamas, somebody claimed. I don't believe that. According to the reports that they have emerged since the start of Operation Al-Aqsa Flood, which was Hamas's operation, Israel ignored many warnings of the possible attack. We talked about all of them. The Times of Israel reported on the 26th of October that warnings provided by low-level surveillance soldiers were ignored by higher-ranking officials. We've seen 4 examples of that. Tel Aviv reportedly also ignored warnings directly from Egypt, from an intelligence official revealed that this was possibly going to happen. This thing has officially blown up in their face. Now, another video I wanted to play for you on a similar line. And I might not play it all the way through, but I still think this was important. It's a similar point.
Propaganda aimed at justifying its war on Palestinians in Gaza is being challenged and ridiculed on social media after a series of controversial videos and statements began circulating online. Following Israel's brutal raid of Gaza's Al-Shifa hospital, many are finding its claims of Hamas operating a command center under the hospital hard to believe. Social media users were quick to detect inconsistencies in the Israeli military's narrative, prompting a viral trend on TikTok, with creators parodying videos of Israeli forces showcasing alleged Hamas evidence.
There is a list. This list, in Arabic.
What is this, you may ask? Hamas tunnels. This is a map of Hamas.
This guide is a manual to create weapons of mass destruction.
as users mock Israeli claims like the alleged discovery of Hitler's Mein Kampf in a child's bedroom in Gaza and the infamous calendar on Al-Shifa's wall supposedly displaying the names of Hamas operatives. Israel's public messaging policy, known as Hasbara, is taking a huge hit. Hebrew for explanation, Hasbara is a public diplomacy scheme that uses information warfare to promote the strategic objectives of the Israeli state. The Israeli narrative is presented as the only legitimate and reliable voice, as per Israel's promotion of itself as the only democracy in the Middle East, while Palestinian voices are presented as violent, anti-Semitic, and untrustworthy. Hasbara targets politicians and the public through mass media, but also through the funding of research centres, NGOs, and lobbying firms. Israel additionally offers Hasbara scholarships and grants to students and young professionals to spread pro-Israel messaging. In 2017, the Israeli Strategic Affairs Ministry even sponsored an app, 4IL, aimed at combating anti-Israeli propaganda online. While Israel has been successful in convincing Western politicians and media agencies of their narrative, they are now facing a new challenge: the rising influence of a generation that has grown up with smartphones and social media. Generation Z, or Gen Z. Propaganda that would have been believed in the past is being challenged by tech-savvy youth who use social media networks as their search engines and news feeds. In fact, the abundance of pro-Palestinian messaging on TikTok forced the social media giant to deny allegations that its algorithms were deliberately promoting such content. TikTok pointed out that young people simply support Palestine much more than they do Israel. And the data backs it up. TikTok's Free Palestine hashtag has 25.5 billion views, in contrast with Stand With Israel's 440.4 million. Between Israel's increasingly ineffective misinformation campaign and the rise of Palestinian content creators and ordinary people using social media to directly document and share Israel's war crimes, young people are losing trust in legacy media. For instance, as part of a condition to access Gaza and report on Israel's ground invasion, CNN and other networks have agreed to allow the Israeli military to have final editorial say, prompting many to conclude that the news agencies on the ground are invariably compromised.
It's like not even up for debate. I mean, really think about that. If you allow anybody to have editorial control over your work, you're not a journalist unless it's your editor, right? Like, that's crazy. You're going to a side in the conflict and allowing them to control what you say. I mean, guys, that's what they used to be embarrassed to admit that. Or rather, they used to do everything they could to make sure you never saw that, because that used to expose them as being propaganda. Now it's just kind of publicly stated. Why? Because I think they've almost lost sight of the reality. Like, they think that's what they're supposed to do, right? Because Israel's the good guy. Like, it's just so ridiculous. These outlets, remember the time when they used to pretend like they weren't even partisan? Remember that? Not that long ago, when the news was nonpartisan. I mean, we don't even pretend that anymore. You got the left and the right, and they own that now. Like, these are sitcom channels, or these aren't news anymore. It's obvious what this is. That's embarrassing. They should be embarrassed with themselves, but I don't think they care anymore.
By contrast, Palestinian journalists in Gaza, such as Mu'taz Azaiza, have gained almost 14 million followers on Instagram since October 7th.
Wow.
Social media users have also shared their screenshots of genocidal statements made by Israeli officials that were posted online before being deleted, in an effort to highlight the nefarious intentions behind Israel's brutal assault on Gaza.
And so it's interesting, right? Why'd they delete them then? I just don't think they're used to being this called out as the Zionist government. I really don't. I think they delete them because it's just like suddenly realize that we're losing control. But yet they still do it. It's like the Lindsey Graham effect, right? Lindsey Graham will just go out and say, somebody assassinate that guy. Do you think that's what everybody wants him to say? I think people hate him for that. It's not because they care, but because it's clumsy and dumb, and it makes everybody look like they're ridiculous, because he is ridiculous, and most of them are too. But some of them are better at hiding it.
Israel has attempted to improve its reputation by emailing influencers and media personalities, offering to pay for their public support. But the propaganda bill is racking up, with Israel reportedly spending over $7 million on YouTube ads in the month after the Hamas attack.
And still failing.
In November 2023, it was reported that US billionaires were being recruited to fund a media campaign, Facts for Peace, to boost Israel's image and demonize Palestinian resistance group Hamas. Former Google CEO Eric Schmidt, Dell CEO Michael Dell, and financier Michael Milken, together worth some $500 billion, have all been solicited.
Right. All the good guys, right? Clearly, all the good guys.
Together worth some $500 billion, have all been solicited. But despite the financial resources behind the Israeli lobby, these top-down efforts may actually further damage Israel's credibility and deepen the gap between older and younger generations.
We're not buying it anymore.
Meanwhile, videos from grassroots Palestinian journalists and activists in Gaza continue to reveal the realities of living under siege and Israeli bombardment. So will social media be the death of Israeli Hasbara propaganda?
We should sure hope so, or for any propaganda for that matter. But let's get into Al-Shifa for a minute, and then we're going to basically finish with the overall point of the ceasefire, where's it going, and the history around this, and where, the evidence of what's already happened. Now, it's important to point this out. Not only has Israel's entire agenda around Al-Shifa completely blown up in its face, it seems that they're, really put yourself in a position of somebody, a liar, a propagandist, to the point where nobody's believing what you're saying. What do? You can't logically just go back. You can't say, oh, okay, you got us, because that would ruin it even more and potentially even put you in jail. So what do? You double down. You push harder in hopes that the mechanisms you've used, the mainstream media, the government support you will do something to allow it to continue. So Al-Shifa was a massacre of innocent people. And all the things they put out have been, embarrassingly falling apart. And now they've taken it to the point where they've arrested the director of the hospital because, that might make it look like they did the right thing. They've now arrested director of Al-Shifa hospital using their manufactured evidence. This is a person who has been treating as best they could with no resources those who were being bombed and attacked by Israeli forces. How can the world stand by and watch this? And as I understand it, apparently there's like 5 people left in the hospital with nothing who are still managing to try to treat the hundreds of people that are still there with nothing. You imagine how horrifying that is. As they said, following what they claim the indisputable evidence. Right, just because you say it doesn't make it true. And let's not forget, IDF was this exact channel was one of the ones that are connected in with this Hasbara campaign, indicating the Shifa hospital served as a Hamas command and control center. Did it now. The director of the hospital was apprehended and transferred. So now you put him in, now you've indefinitely detained the director of the hospital because you got caught lying. It says not only did Hamas exploit the hospital's electricity and resources to build and sustain an extensive network of terrorist tunnels. Oh, is that what they showed? Its terrorists also sought refuge there immediately after committing the massacre. Or it's a video that very clearly was showing them bring in somebody for medical treatment. At a time when I argue the people in this hospital had no idea possibly even what was going on. Early in the morning on October 7th, you rush in with somebody, doctors are going to treat somebody. Either way, the point is, you're telling me that you're now, as we talked about already, do you know what they've done with Palestinians? They hurt, and the examples we've shown you across the field where they allow these people to lay there and die and bleed out on the ground. In fact, stop ambulances from coming to help them. Whereas here you can have an example of the reverse. Or all the people that have so far left and told them they were treated kindly. Either way, the point is, and that's even the point even of what they were claiming about Shifa was true at all, which I think it was a completely manufactured narrative, largely because Hamas is very aware they've been claiming this about Al-Shifa for a decade, which is where Gareth Porter's article comes in, which arguably proves that they were never there. And this was something that they already knew, but went forward anyway because they wanted to take care of the hospitals. Oh, that's a good point, as Katie makes in the chat, right? What electricity exactly are they siphoning off, as you don't allow them to have any electricity? But Solomon Ahmed points out their official statement in regard to what they just did with the Hamas's statement with the director. This is what they stated directly from Hamas. We strongly condemn the Israeli Nazi occupation's arrest of Dr. Muhammad Abu Salamiyah general director of the Al-Shifa hospital, along with several medical staff who remained at the facility to help patients and wounded evacuate. So for all I know, those last remaining ones were taken too. We see this move by Israel as nothing less than despicable, lacking any sense of humanity and morals. It is also a flagrant violation of international norms and charters, given obligations to ensure that medical personnel are never harmed, including in times of war. We call on international bodies, including the International Committee of the Red Cross and the WHO, with which Dr. Mohammed was in contact to evacuate the remaining patients and wounded from Al-Shifa Hospital, to exert pressure on the Israeli occupation army to secure his release, along with the medical personnel who was arrested simply for continuing to fulfill their humanitarian duty. Like, based on this logic, shouldn't Netanyahu be in prison for treating Al-Qaeda in Syria, which they've admitted to? Acting, even I think it was the former Mossad chief was just simply saying, well, you got to be kind to your enemies. He said that on a live interview. But then when put to him about whether he would treat Hezbollah, he said no. So ridiculous. The point is that if you're claiming that a hospital who treats these people is somehow, even though that's not what you can even prove happened here, again, it's always a double standard in every single way. Now, to the point about whether their allegations are even true, right? They're arresting this doctor because they claim they're indisputable proof, right? Well, first of all, in case you hadn't already seen it, we already caught, I believe I'm the first one to catch this. I've already seen a lot of people using my images to share this around without citing the link so you can prove it for yourself. A la Twitter files. The Wikipedia page for Al-Shifa has been edited to remove the fact that tunnels were built under the hospital in 1983 by Israel. I've shown you this. The link to the page is right there. You can check it out for yourself, both to my article as well as the archive, so you can see it. It said, in particular, in 1983, the Israelis built a secure underground operating room and tunnel network. Very clear. Underneath the hospital. And this is the page for Al-Shifa Hospital in general. And then afterward, it weirdly says now, during a renovation in the 1990s, a large basement was added. That they say Hamas used. Maybe that's better. That better aligns with the waiting room they showed you with a couple of guns in it, right? Pretty ridiculous. Now, also, in case you hadn't seen it, let's not forget that Ehud Barak, on the record, on to CNN, former prime minister, also member of Epstein Island, admits that on the record. And you can play it for yourself. We just played it, where he literally says, built a bunker. And then she goes, just want to make sure you didn't misspeak, and tries to correct them and then moves along really quickly. Which, by the way, now that this has been deleted, we're getting a wash of people going, you're lying. That's a fake image. It didn't say that. Even though the link is right there. It's the kind of Hasbara thing I think we're seeing. The point, though, is also people are going, he didn't say that. He said a bunker. Do you not know the difference? And I said, okay, well, let's pretend for a minute that he didn't mean tunnels. How exactly do you get to the bunker? Through osmosis? Yeah, you need a tunnel. No, they talk about stairs and this. It's just like they're just trying to find any deviation from it. They already told you that there were tunnels that were built per this point, but they just are trying to hide from it. But just so you understand, somebody already deleted what was on Wikipedia because it proved that they built what was under there. So even if they show you something that you believe you can prove was there, and they haven't done that yet, as far as I'm concerned, they built this. And that's my point, is I believe what we're seeing when we get to Gareth Porter's article is that it basically proves, in my opinion, that Hamas already knew that they would be doing this. That's why they cemented it up like it turned out they did a long time ago, in my opinion, because they're not dumb enough to stay in the exact location they've been telling the world they were staying in. Like, doesn't that just seem like childishly dumb? So they went somewhere else, which is the point, it seems, that Gareth's article exposes, that they already found what they claim was the headquarters of Hamas. They just lied about it because they still wanted to go after the hospitals. Now, before we get to that, very interestingly, Israeli society has erupted after Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak correctly stated on CNN, that Israel built a tunnel network under Al-Shifa. They're now calling him a terrorist. So wait a minute. All these Hasbara trolls online, did he not say it? Did he say it right and I misunderstood? Or did he say it wrong? Or did he say, well, that's a weird way to frame it, but or did he admit there were tunnels and then now he's a terrorist because of it? You can't really have it both ways. If everyone in Israel is calling him a terrorist now, or the people in Israel saying that, then clearly he said something that you don't want us to hear. The point is that people are calling for him to be removed from society. has drawn significant backlash. Singer Kobe Peretz literally called for to remove his citizenship. Think about how wild that is. Accusing him of supporting terror for admitting what he knows is the fact. He was the prime minister. Model Natalie Dunham criticized him, urging the withdrawal from public life. And you've seen the clip. He says it's already known for many years that they have in the bunkers originally was built by Israeli constructors. As a command post of Hamas. Right. So we're going to pretend like, anyway, you get the main point here. And I think it's really, really obvious that you say the wrong thing, get out of society. The newspaper writes the story we're not supposed to hear, you're going to get removed. Democracy, right? Well, here's another example that's really embarrassing. Just another Fox News faux pas here where he's talking. I don't think they thought this would be very well seen. Mohammed Shida points out that, well, I'll just let you play it. And he points out something very interesting, I think reveals one of the many points we've been pointing out.
Part of the hospital?
It is not the part of the hospital.
So they're underground in the supposed bunker, and the Fox News guy's asking if it's part of the hospital.
I mean, is this part of the hospital?
It is not the part of the hospital.
Because it looks like the tile from the hospital, you know what I mean? It looks like the same tile. I mean,
Oh, he does look like the same tile because it was built with the same tile. Like, this is the point. This was built by Israel, and it's the same tile as in the hospital. Are we going to pretend that Hamas used the tiles from the hospital? Like, it's just, I mean, anything's possible. But all the evidence points in one very obvious direction. And here it gets even better. Now, by the way, this is 1% of all the information we've already broke down about Al-Shifa. What I should actually do, see if it's right here, maybe. I'll just open one really quickly for you. I will include, oh, actually, I think I can do this. There you go. I'll just include this one, which has most of the information in it. Israel caught lying about Al-Shifa. Point is, a lot of the information is already in there. We broke down all the lies going through their videos, breaking down the inconsistencies, as, by the way, even BBC did, even CNN did. I mean, it's embarrassing. Proving they removed boxes or added guns, claiming it was unedited in proof. It's embarrassing. And then, guess what? So they put out the last thing they did, proving the tunnel, even though everybody caught that there was an edit where you couldn't prove that it was in the same location. And too late. Can't check now. Guess why? They destroyed it. It's over. We found it. We proved it. We destroyed it. Any questions? Israel destroys the only evidence of Hamas tunnels under Al-Shifa before allowing any independent experts to examine it. I wonder why. Israel never provided any evidence that the alleged tunnel was being used during the war, first of all, and not just an abandoned infrastructure, but also never, in my opinion, proved that it was even actually the tunnel under Al-Shifa. And Electronic Intifada has broken this down. I mean, there's many examples that are clumsy, like edits that you can see are like different areas, like the lighting changes, everything. It's just poorly done. Here's their actual post. The IDF has completed its operational preparations according to the defensive positions of the pause. Earlier this morning, our troops destroyed a route of underground terrorist tunnels and tunnel shafts in the area of Al-Shifa. So I guess we have to take their word for it going forward. In addition, over the last day, our troops struck various terrorist targets from our land. Great. So just almost in passing, stuck between two different points. Yeah, and we did this, we did that, we destroyed the tunnel, and we're going forward. They destroyed the tunnel. Or maybe it wasn't even there. I guess we'll just trust them because Israel says, right? Well, here's the important part. According to Gareth Porter, Consortium News, which you should definitely make sure you're following, IDF knew real Hamas headquarters while lying about Al-Shifa. Now, another way to look at it, by the way, is that they were already lying about a different location, just to add a different point to it. I'm only saying it like that because who knows whether they were... I don't take at face value anything the Israeli government or any government's putting forward. But what the point is, they claimed and literally published through Jerusalem Post that they found their headquarters on the 14th. We'll come back to that. But I'll read his directly from Gareth Porter. Although corporate news media have made it clear they don't buy the IDF claim that Al-Shifa Hospital has been a cover for Hamas command and control center and weapons armory, Western media has failed to report the much bigger story. So first of all, don't miss that point. It's not up for debate, guys. Nobody's believing them, not even the corporate media. The IDF and the Israeli government already knew when they launched their propaganda campaign about Al-Shifa that Hamas had no military command and control facility hidden there because they had already found the complex kilometers away. As Consortium News reported last week, for 15 years, the Israelis claimed Hamas was operating its primary command and control base from a tunnel underneath Al-Shifa. That's my point. And Hamas is well aware of that. Literally everybody in the world is aware of that. After the Israeli bombing campaign against Gaza began in October, the Israeli military amplified that message to press its contention that by hiding the Hamas high command, Al-Shifa Hospital had lost its immunity from military operations under the law of war and could now legitimately be taken over by force, which is not even accurate, even if they were. According to every international rights or international law, human rights lawyer, United Nations, they've all stood up and said that's not true. But that's how this goes. They just say, yes, it is. And the U.S. government goes, yes, we agree. Even though they're not the ones that create this or acknowledge it. And these groups that are calling them liars have been the groups that they tell us to look to in the past. That's why everybody's questioning this. On November 11th, the IDF spokesman, Richard Hetch, declared that Al-Shifa was the main hub of Hamas activity. Newsweek reported the IDF regarded Al-Shifa Hospital as the Hamas's main command post, Israel says. And the Times of Israel headlined, Hamas leaders again hiding under hospital. Again, what, they left and came back? The crescendo of Israeli propaganda about Al-Shifa being a human shield for Hamas came with a long report published by the New York Times on November 14th. It was based on interviews with 8 present and former intelligence defense officials. Great. So a bunch of people with interest in lying, describing a vast military compound complex under Al-Shifa with multiple levels, just like the mock video they made and never proved. But something quite unexpected had happened during this new round of press stories on Al-Shifa that completely demolished the entire IDF storyline. The IDF had gained control of the, as he frames it, again, this is why I think we should question this too, but that they stated they gained control of the real Hamas command and control center in an area where the Hamas leadership had previously had their above-ground offices and the Al-Atara neighborhood in the extreme northwest of Bet Lahia city, 8.5 kilometers away from Al-Shifa. After that office building was demolished, the IDF discovered a major tunnel facility that was quite certain had been central headquarters for the Hamas High Command, the command and control center for the entire war. Of course, the IDF leaked that information to the Jerusalem Post, which they said explicitly in that, exactly what you just heard. The discovery was made several days ago of a tunnel with an elevator. Another one like that. Interesting. That reached 30 meters underground, compared with only 5 meters under other tunnels. Furthermore, it had been equipped with oxygen, air conditioning, and more advanced communications than anywhere else. The major IDF discovery, made on or before the November 11th false stories about Al-Shifa, threatened to undermine the Israeli political campaign to justify the IDF's takeover and destruction of Gaza's hospitals on the grounds that they were human shields for Hamas. So to be clear, it's obvious Gareth Porter does not believe this. In fact, he believes his research proves that they're lying, but also realize that what they're saying over here are talking about tunnels and command centers. And even if it's true, they're talking about being under a building that they controlled, not a school, not a hospital. It's very different, isn't it? Al-Shifa Hospital was the centerpiece of that campaign based on the claim that it was hiding the high command of Hamas in a tunnel beneath it. Obviously, the IDF and the extreme right-wing Israel government would not want to stop all further publicity or would want to stop all further coverage of this about the discovery of the actual Hamas high command underground base because they still had interest of destroying these hospitals. No story about the discovery of the real Hamas high command bunker has been published inside Israel or elsewhere in the nearly 2 weeks since the detailed Jerusalem Post piece on the 14th, when we showed you. Somehow, the Israeli government and media have been able to completely suppress the discovery of the Hamas headquarters, despite the fact that a number of foreign news media have offices in Tel Aviv. And the story is still available on the internet. It's right there. Instead of forcing a major climb down by the IDF and the Netanyahu and Biden administrations, the discovery of the real Hamas underground high command center merely brought a slight revision in the wording used to refer to the issue, which we picked up on. We just didn't know where it fit in. You remember it. a U.S. official familiar with U.S. intelligence, who may all basically probably Jake Sullivan, commented that the Hamas had a command node, right? Kirby towed that line under Al-Shifa, using a term that Israeli officials apparently adopted in light of a new discovery. You know, the actual command center. So they brought some guns and some fake information, put some things on the ground and said, command node, take out all the hospitals. It says several hours later that morning, in a 7-minute video inside the MRI building, which you saw, IDF spokesperson Jonathan Conricus showed a grab bags of military gear with AK-47s, grenades, uniforms, and other random things neatly arranged on the floor. He insisted that Hamas had used the MRI room to store weapons and military gear, which many argued didn't make much sense, seeing as how if it was used, that wouldn't work. And we know the hospital was active. He also produced one computer, which we proved was an obvious fake, which he suggested had been found to contain incriminating evidence of military relevance. Even though we showed that the keys were in Hebrew and they claimed it was a Hamas computer, they showed the CD-ROMs, even though it didn't have a CD drive. The image that they later censored out was an image of somebody that they claim was kidnapped, even though you can see a post from October 12th. I mean, they just did not think that through. The most obvious problem with this 7-minute video, he writes, however, is that it showed nothing that could not have been easily brought into the building by the IDF. And they even got caught bringing in a bunch of boxes with clumsily taped on things that said medical supplies. And then didn't do anything with medical supplies. And then those boxes were found behind the guns in a later video that they removed when the BBC went. Very embarrassing. The more serious problem with the presentation is that it offered no plausible reason for Hamas to have hidden a few dozen small weapons and other military gear, which, by the way, to anybody understanding military operations is almost meaningless in the context of what's really going on. And doing so in an MRI room of a hospital and then supposedly having left them there when they ran away, which I also pointed out made no sense. Very well prepared in this car that they left it all in and then booby-trapped that we never got to see. And that they later claimed there was a tunnel underneath that car. That's literally what they claimed. I mean, it was just so broken. There was simply no need for Hamas to store weapons there. It doesn't make sense. He goes on to say a much bigger problem for IDF credibility on Al-Shifa is that on October 27th, IDF spokesman Daniel Hagari, you know, the one that told you a calendar was a terror list, presented an artist's conception showing that Hamas had taken over parts of 5 different buildings at Al-Shifa and was using all of them to plan and coordinate its military activity. Remember this video? None of that was true. He also showed a drawing of the structure of the main building, which he insisted was based on Israeli intelligence, showing that an underground floor of the main building was completely controlled by Hamas. He also insisted that there was an entrance within the hospital to that underground floor, none of which was proven. The Hagari presentation came before the discovery of the actual Hamas command center. So maybe they just confused it. Maybe they just made a mistake and covered it up. Quite frankly, I think it was all about lying, but either way. He says the IDF has now eliminated the entire long video, as we've shown you, detailed and illustrated presentation by Hagari from their website, removed it, like 90% of what they put out, because it would become a major embarrassment to the IDF once the full truth is known. Just like with everything else, they later go back and they'll just tell you you're lying. That Wikipedia page never existed, you're a liar. That's why we have to save these things and prove it. The real story of the Israeli effort to sell its argument that Hamas took over Al-Shifa and other hospitals to coordinate attacks is the massive deception aimed at U.S. media and the public opinion in order to justify Israel's war of obliteration on the population of Gaza, and specifically the infrastructure needed to maintain a society. Schools, hospitals, water infrastructure, food, everything. That campaign of deceit has had the full-throated support of the Biden administration, which stands equally guilty of misleading the American public in its support of an illicit Israeli war. The failure of the Israeli propaganda campaign has been so decisive that most major media organizations have explicitly distanced themselves from the Israeli claims about Al-Shifa. That's what I'm talking about. And several have shown either field reporters or analysts in the studio declaring explicitly that the evidence displayed by the Israelis had not proved their case at all. It's not far-fetched to realize that some of these people just realize they're not all explicitly a part of the agenda, right? So from some level, they just realize like, man, this is bad. And I don't want to lose all of my following, or we don't want to lose our support. So my point is sometimes they just pull back and sometimes it aligns. I don't think it's because these platforms are honest. Now here, you can read this for yourself, and we've even shown you this image. This is not even a new one in regard to the image. Well, in fact, they might have just used an old image, to be quite frank. That's what they do all the time. But the point is, you can read this from the 14th, where they're very clearly telling you headquarters. You don't have two headquarters, right? That's the main location. Everything they're doing is falling apart. And on top of that, by the way, remember when we went through every one of these videos? We showed you what they claimed they found, every one of them. Are we to pretend that that somehow materialized to all of those guns? Really? Hardly. This, as I said, how odd how the 10 or so guns they showed in their deleted, then reposted, highly edited, uncut videos that they released suddenly turn into this huge display, which is not even that huge in the real sense. We're talking about what's going on when they're all placed in different locations. What honest, objective person would take this face value after all the lies? Somebody as ridiculous and cartoonish as Dr. Eli David, of course. Look at all the things they say they found. How dare you not blindly take this at face value? Ridiculous. Also, same kind of thing happening other places. Apparently, they just keep doing it. They go, look, once again, we say we found this thing on this bed. Take our word. That's what they're doing. Here's a pink bedroom that we just have things neatly organized on top of the bed. We found it there. But was it organized like that, or did you move it from there? And why did you do it like that then? But here's one underneath a child's bed, across from it. So that was neatly organized, and this one was inside? I mean, this is just absurd. So are they going to every room across all of Gaza and looking under every bed? I mean, look, is it possible Hamas is using a child? Of course it is. I wouldn't, but the point is just with this level, how many times they've been caught lying, deleting, editing, hiding, saying Hamas did it. Wait, no, never mind. We did it, or we didn't. No, Hamas did it. Everything has been so obvious. And we're just supposed to take images at face value? And it's basically the same setup every single time. A single gun. I mean, it just, again, to Gareth's point, it just doesn't make any sense. And then why'd they leave it there? Is it supposed to be some catch-all? I mean, you can ask questions all day long. The point is, it's obvious that they have lied to us egregiously, and not even the corporate media is engaging with this anymore. And of course, they're showing you on the outskirts of Jabalia refugee camp, because that's why we killed those 400 people for that one hypothetical person, because, see, there's a gun there and in a bed. As he says, ladies and gentlemen, I want to show you the headquarters of the control unit of Hamas. This is literally what they showed you. Right? Dear world, enough proof for you. And it was that room with the same tile and a couple of bathrooms. That's all it was. They just keep trying, and they keep failing. Now, again, just to reiterate, for those that don't think this matters, let's just say all this is true. Let's say literally everything they're showing you is true. Does it not matter to you that basically all of the Israeli population are going, you did this? Here's even Haaretz that posted this the day after, 2 days after October 7th, where they're citing what Netanyahu said on the record. This is Haaretz. Again, one of the reasons they're trying to get them shut down now, in my opinion. Anyone who wants to thwart the establishment of a Palestinian state, you know, the thing they swear up and down they want, obviously they don't. I keep trying to show everybody that. Anyone who wants to thwart the establishment of that state they claim they want has to support bolstering Hamas and transferring money to Hamas. Transferring money. And arms, by the way. But the point is that even if it's just money, that means they're giving them the resources they need to buy those guns. And we're not supposed to blame, so you can act like this is all somebody else's fault, all Palestinians, when you can prove as a matter of fact that this, as he says, this is part of our strategy. I mean, it's just willful ignorance. And again, the other side of it, if you want to pretend that, let's just say that's not true. And you want to say, well, look, they're using them as human shields. Well, again, the United Nations investigated this, I think about a decade or so ago, and found no evidence of it. Doesn't mean it's not true. And recent discussions post October 7th, they've all been saying, look, if that's the allegation, the responsibility is on you to prove that. You don't just get to say Hamas human shields and bomb buildings. That's what they're doing, though. But we need to remember on top of that, as I wrote here, we've all heard the allegations of Hamas's human shields. But are you aware that Israel has a stated policy of using Palestinians in this way? It's called the neighbor procedure. So first, recognize that to claim that they need to prove they're using them as human shields, and they haven't. And secondarily, that if you're going to wonder, if you're going to believe them at face value, ask yourself why it would make sense to believe somebody who literally has a stated record of using human shields when you can't prove the other side at this point. 2013, Palestinian children tortured, used as shields by Israel, per the United Nations. Reuters. Israeli soldiers who used Palestinian boy, a 9-year-old, as human shields avoid jail. Defense for Children International, an international human rights group. Israel forces use 5 Palestinian children as human shields. That's 2023. This is from 2017. Generally, human shields. Since the beginning of the occupation in 1967, Israeli security forces have repeatedly used Palestinians in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip as human shields. Israeli soldiers routinely use Palestinian civilians as human shields by forcing them to carry out life-threatening tasks. It was also following a high court petition against this practice, which was filed by human rights organizations around the world in May 2002, that the IDF issued a general order prohibiting the use of Palestinians as a means of human shield against gunfire or attacks by the Palestinian side. But then it goes on to say, following the order, the use of human shields dropped sharply. However, the army did not construe as a human shield the use of Palestinians, provided they consented. The army continued the widespread use of this practice, which they referred to as the neighbor procedure. Following another petition filed by human rights organizations, the High Court of Justice ruled that this practice, too, violated international humanitarian law and that this thus was illegal. And guess what they've never stopped doing? Here is the Institute for Middle East Understanding, the neighbor procedure, Israel's use of Palestinian human shields from 2012. Human Rights Watch. During military operations, Israeli soldiers routinely coerced Palestinian civilians, including children, to perform life-endangering acts that assisted military operations, the practice known as the neighbor procedure. Now, see this? And, there's so much more to get into in the show, the links included. It's just baffling to me. Now, you could very well make the argument that all of those groups are racist or lying. Anything's possible. But at what point do we stand back and look at the body of evidence and realize, with those possible asterisks and caveats, that ultimately what you have is a stated reality that you can prove with endless amounts of videos, even ones caught since October 7th, versus the allegation? Have you seen a single example? Have they shown you a video? Have they shown you anything to prove that? My point is simple. They're doing this because they admitted to it. They said, we'll stop doing it. In 2009, that means that they recorded and admitted to doing so. Then they went to a different version of it called the neighbor procedure, which they then followed up and said that's illegal too. And they've provably not stopped doing that. It's just this dynamic where you're not allowed. The most obvious and provable examples of what's going on this side are fake news, racist, terror supporting, blah, 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 and people just run away from it. That's what we keep seeing. It's everywhere. Now, here's more examples of other actions being taken. Palestinian in the UK writes, the Israeli army killed a Palestinian medical doctor, back to the Al-Shifa discussion, for refusing to abandon his patients. Dr. Mohammed, I probably mispronounced his last name, Abuni Jalia, 38 years old, was killed, and other 2 medical colleagues while at the Al-Awada hospital in northern Gaza, saving lives. Just, hospitals in general. He was working with Doctors Without Borders. They killed this man because he refused to leave his patients. Is that Hamas's fault? These are the kind of things that the media and even Israel just leave alone, because you can't make an argument about this. It's very, very clear. Like the tunnels, like everything else, like deleting the images, they're caught. It's obvious, so people try to avoid it. He leaves wife and children behind. Before he's killing, he said, we as doctors will not abandon our patients, and we still have hope that the world will not abandon us. Not for our sake as medical staff, but for the sake of the patients. Don't let us down. He's dead now. Now, this is not before we even get into the ceasefire part of this. Daniela points out deliberate targeting by Israeli drones of a room full of displaced persons and medical staff at the Indonesian hospital, which, by the way, has been ongoing from the beginning. Here it's the Indonesian hospital in particular is being focused on right now, but all of them involved, as Sarah Abdallah has pointed out. And this person writes, Munir al-Barash, the director of the Ministry of Health in Gaza, informed Al Jazeera Live that the occupation targeted the power generators and the reception building at the Indonesian hospital. Is Hamas in there? Are they, the point is all of this is about stopping the infrastructure, as Gareth Porter is making clear. And here, as Daniela points, the bodies of the martyrs in the Indonesian hospital in northern Gaza after the siege imposed by Israeli occupation army for several days. Right? The point is that they're dying, starving, no water, getting ill, dying from infections, just no treatment. This is what they're allowing to happen or causing themselves. That's not Hamas's fault. Now, generally going to finish the latter half of this with all the discussion about the ceasefire points. Let me make sure I close some of these. I think that's good enough. All right. So Dan Cohen points this out right out of the gate. Now we're going to start basically from yesterday going into today. My arguments you heard on the last show, very, very clear. I was giving you my opinions on what I believe would happen, and a lot of it's already come true. As Dan wrote, a little bit of quick backstory. The point is that, remember, the original agreement, one of the first things I pointed out was that the argument would be that Israel would not maintain their occupation of the north. I have no reason why that would make sense. This is unless they're already claiming that that's now they've taken that part of it, which is what we know is happening. They've already stated that. They've already put flags down. They've already destroyed statues. It's very clear what's happening. The media is trying to blind their eyes from it, and your governments don't care. But so the argument, though, is that if this was if what they said was real, well, they would pull back. They would allow things for 4 days. They would allow people to get what they need from their homes and whatever else. Because remember, the argument's not taking over Gaza. It's going after Hamas. So why would they be worried about pulling back out of the north? Because they don't want to give up the territory, guys. That's what's happening. So the point is, when this started, you have average civilians who tried to go back to their homes in the north, and they shot at them, killed people. All right, so the point is, that is a violation of the ceasefire because you're firing. Not at Hamas, at civilians. Could you not have at least gone, hey, you're not allowed to come here? No, they just shoot at them, guys, because the Palestinians are their enemy. It's not my opinion. They've made that repeatedly clear with their words, with their actions, over and over and over. But 21-second clip just showing you even BBC pointing it out. They're firing on civilians.
We're also hearing that despite an Israeli order for people who are displaced not to head back from the south of the Gaza Strip to their homes in the north, some people have been trying to do so. They've broken off trying to use side roads, and we're hearing that several people have been wounded by Israeli ground forces opening fire.
Right. So just because Israel says you're not allowed to go back to your home, does that make that legal? I mean, you have to realize from their perspective, this is the government that's been dropping things and saying, go here, it's safe. And then when you go there, they bomb you. So at this point, nothing is safe to these people. That's very obvious. They want to go back to their homes. Hopefully it's still not there. But the idea that they would then shoot the average civilians, it shows you everything we've been talking about. They don't care about the civilians because that's the enemy to them. And as Dan points out, they broke the ceasefire as soon as they fired on these civilians, whether or not they told them not to come back, because that is you're firing during the ceasefire, not even at the enemy, mind you, or rather the stated enemy. So that's my point is to them, that is the enemy. But to what they want the world to believe, those are the civilians you're trying to save, right? Here is just the footage of that exact thing happening. As reportedly shows Israel opening fire on civilians attempting to reach their homes in the north of Gaza Strip. 2 are dead, several are wounded. But of course, BBC only says wounded. Does it look like a ceasefire to you? Look at all these people. My God. Look, there's even press sitting right there. There's journalists. We'll get to that in a minute. They're killing journalists just like everybody else. It's just so gross how the international community, for the most part, are just completely brushing right over this. It's obvious what they're doing. They're taking more territory. There's just no way around it. Always what their objective was, that's stated. That's the settlement. That's what they are. They just pretend they don't even pretend. They do it anyway. The U.S. says it's illegal. Even the U.S., they do it anyway. And guess what the U.S. does? Absolutely nothing. Because the law matters, right? Well, here's the actual video if you want to watch it yourself from Andula English. Here is another video from from Sky News discussing the same thing. I think it's probably redundant, but I'll play the first part of it.
From our camera crew inside Gaza, that they were moving with a very large group of Gazans who wanted to move from the south, where they'd been told to go to reach safety. They wanted to...
Yeah, but while being bombed, all the way there, and then while they're there. Safety.
Move north, because many families have been split. And in the north, there are still, in amongst the crowd that our camera crew were with, there were still mothers who were saying that their children were on the other side.
Okay, so think about that. You're a mother out there listening, especially if you're a mother out there that thinks all Palestinians are terrorists. If you're listening, right? Your child is still there in the north, and you're trying to go back during the ceasefire. You're told there's a ceasefire, so you go back to try to get your child, and they shoot you. Democracy.
And as they reached the division between north and south, where Israeli military are still stationed, our cameraman spoke very graphically, sending us audio clips, saying that as this crowd of men, but also women and children in amongst the crowd who could clearly be seen, you can see it on the pictures that he's filmed, there was direct shooting towards the crowd and into the crowd.
Why would you do that? I mean, honestly, to put it in any other circumstance, you're in the middle of a ceasefire, and the stated reality is that the civilians are the ones you're trying to protect. That's what the whole argument is, right? Get them out of the way because we're trying to go after Hamas. And then those same people try to go back and you fire at them without even a warning. It's so obvious what's happening.
He himself witnessed a number of people being shot. At least 2 were killed. He himself appears to have narrowly escaped being shot whilst he was filming these scenes. And certainly his images that he captured on his camera show very graphically a number of young men sustaining quite bad wounds on their legs and on their body, and being dragged back by the crowd, who there was a mass panic broke out and they all started running back towards the south.
Yeah, and where? Right? You got shot in the leg. Where are you going to go? The hospital? No, sorry. They're occupying that one. They bombed this one. That one's been completely destroyed. There's no water, electricity, or fuel in any of them. I guess you're going to die. Democracy.
This is a corridor, let's just remind ourselves, which they were told was meant to be a safe, so-called safe humanitarian corridor to the north. And they were under the impression there was a ceasefire. The Israelis, on the other hand, say that they dropped leaflets over Khan Yunis in the south, and they advised.
And I guess, does everybody know that? Like, this is one of the things that Amnesty International called out explicitly. There's examples of them literally telling one person on a street and then bombing the building, as if that then trickled through everybody in that building with little time. That's Amnesty International proving that. In this case, you drop leaflets, which, by the way, they've already gotten leaflets, but they follow and then get bombed. So they don't know what to do. But are you going to pretend that everybody knew that? What if people were already walking away from Khan Yunis? What if they weren't in that city and they were all the way to the border already? You're going to tell that you just shoot on people. They don't care about these people. It could not be more obvious.
People not to go to the north because, in their words, it was still a war zone. For many people, the trauma is nowhere near over.
And let's not forget, BBC, of course, completely gave them a pass by saying, well, they were told not to go. No, oh, were they? No, they dropped leaflets. To assume everybody knew that is ridiculous. Now, here is a horrifying video. And this is important. This is one of the things we talked about. One of the reasons they were so worried about this, and this is the U.S. government leaked out, heard this from, their back, or, usually I think they want you to, for some reason, to hear this, like it shows their humanity or something. that journalists now during the ceasefire would be able to go in the fake ceasefire to go in and get to see all the things that they've been trying to stop you from seeing. In this case, it's the safe route that they were told to use. And what you're going to see is that safe route littered with dead bodies of children, women, and men who took the safe route and were murdered on the safe route by Israel.
لمواطنين متواجدة على طريق البحر، نحتاج إلى إسعاف التوجه للمكان. هاي هي جثث تم استهدافهم وهم ينزحون من مدينة غزة باتجاه المناطق الجنوبية. الجثث مر عليها وقت، هي دخلت في طور التحلل الآن. الجثث دخلت في طور التحلل. المكان هذا خطر جدا، يجب أن نخلي المكان هذا الآن.
That's just so horrifying. Here, Apo points out charred bodies of the martyrs who were recovered on the coastal road, right? They on the road they were told to go on because they told them it would be safe. Not only did they shoot these people, but they bombed these people. That's what we keep telling you, right? And so here is an example of a burned up body, which is interesting as we're being told about the burned up bodies, as we seem to see exactly what we keep being told Hamas did, even though we now know that was Hellfire missiles from the helicopters, and now we get to see the same thing. It's not hard to understand what you're looking at here, guys. It's the same thing. Now, we're going to get into the actual exchange point, but just before that, I wanted to point out what I was seeing late last night. Or actually, I posted in the morning yesterday, but during the day. And it's far more than 6 videos now, and I still think this is relevant. Daniela points out, since last night, occupation forces, this is on the 23rd, have launched a widespread arrest campaign in the West Bank, detaining 90 Palestinians. This is widely being shown. On this big surge, arresting all sorts of children. Why? Right before you're supposed to give back children? I mean, is it like some kind of, are you trying meet some kind of arbitrary number you're supposed to be holding? Or is it because you want to take enough people to be able to return those people and not have it affect what you're holding? I don't even know. But it's very ridiculous. We're talking about people being taken right before they're about to take people back. Now, here's 4 videos that you could see right there alone in this tweet. And I've saw at least 4 others and many more since then. As I said, many of these videos from the last 24 hours showing the IDF detaining children. I said, I think this is likely explaining the delay. Remember, because it was supposed to be Thursday, and it delayed. Likely explaining the delay in the ceasefire as Israel scoops up enough new detained children to exchange so as to not have to return the 7K they already have. And clarifying, I meant detainees, not that they're all children. Now, also, 12 hours before the 7 a.m. ceasefire took effect, the Israeli occupation forces were escalating their genocidal campaign against Gazan hospitals, schools, homes. How does that make sense? You're getting in every murder and bomb and destruction right before the ceasefire? I mean, it's because we already know. They're telling you, if you listen, we're not going to stop. I already read Associated Press day before yesterday. They're making it very clear. We're not stopping. The moment this is over, we're going right back to bombing. We're taking this territory. And Biden's over here telling the world, we are going to get a longer ceasefire. I know it. He knows damn well they're not going to do that. All areas of the Gaza Strip have been targeted in the last 6 hours. Just moments ago, she says, 13 martyrs ascended after the occupation forces warplanes bombed a school, which was run by the United Nations, of course, but that just happens every day now. No one cares. I guess Israel can say blandly without any evidence that the UN is Hamas, and then people just get scared of it, I guess. And just think about it. Imagine if this were Iran bombing UN schools. Just one. I mean, this again, I don't need to convince anybody. The world sees this, and that's why. It's so blatantly two-sided. Double standard, hypocrisy everywhere. Additionally, all hospitals north of the Gaza Valley have ceased services. Their forces, they drone bombed the entrance of the Kamal Adwan Hospital a few hours ago. And people aren't even reporting half this stuff. Also in the northern Gaza, this one family had been bombed, resulting in 10 dead people. Doctors Without Borders reported a number of their clinics near Al-Shifa were bombed. Several areas of the Al-Sabri, Al-Zatoun were bombarded. I mean, just hospitals, refugee camps, schools, All in the last 24 hours. But I guess we'll just pretend it's all Hamas, right? In southern Gaza, where they're supposed to be safe. The Kuwaiti hospital was bombed. Number of martyrs being bombed at the old Johnny family home. Raised 7 people were killed. Their warplanes destroyed 3 mosques. Just example of them bombing this ambulance. Now, as Sarah points out as well, yesterday leading up into today, overnight, they started, guess what? Raining white phosphorus down on the residential areas of the Jabalia refugee camp. You know, the place where they already bombed and killed 400 people? Let's just give them some white phosphorus because we just hate them that much. Israel always commits the most heinous and barbaric crimes just before a supposed ceasefire. This was last night. Clearly, they want peace, right? Well, according to CBS News, bringing this today, 24 hostages have been released as temporary ceasefire, or rather a pause in murder in Israel's war on Gaza. It says Qatari Foreign Minister spokesman Dr. Majid Al-Ansari said on social media that in total, 24 hostages have been released. That include the 13 Israeli hostages and then an additional 10 Thai hostages and 1 Filipino hostage. And it's funny how these words are, it's so funny how some places are calling them all hostages. Some places are calling only the hostages on one side, the other one's prisoners. It's just so ridiculous. They're all illegally taking people for their own purposes. It's no different on Israel's side, and it's just childish we pretend otherwise. But it says, Al-Ansari also said that 39 Palestinian women, children, detained in Israeli jails were released, upholding the commitment of the first day of the agreement. So it's funny, if you read any of these, what you'll notice is they always come right out of the gate. These Israeli hostages have been returned. And almost like an afterthought down there, you go, oh yeah, and some Palestinians too. And that's it, just that quick little notice, and right back, it's right back to the ones from Israel. It's just, you're talking about an exchange of innocent people. That's what we're all being told, right? These are Palestinians, but of course, from the Israeli side, we're calling them all terrorists. Even though I'm going to literally show you again today that these are just arbitrarily detained people for things like throwing stones in most cases. And that's per their own information, guys. It's per Amnesty and even corporate media covering it. Just because Ben Shapiro yells something does not make it true. Or Eli David or the rest of these screaming, whining, losing people. But it goes on to say the releases are part of the deal that call for Hamas to free at least 50 people and Israel to release dozens of Palestinians from its prisons. Israel's military sounded, this is important, Israel's military sounded alarms in several villages near Gaza just minutes after the short-term truce began. See? I'm telling you. Now, as far as I could tell, nothing happened. Simply, and even they reported, they did this warning people of incoming rocket fire. But there was no immediate word of ongoing violence. So apparently they just sound the alarms, as they always do, but for some reason didn't pull that trigger. That's what I think. They don't just sound the alarms for fun. They do this because they want to claim that there's rockets. And in the past, as we just showed you, they do this. They say they fired a rocket, and that's their fault. We're going to go back to murdering. Which I'm willing to bet you probably happens another way. My opinion. I mean, you can all call this bias. Maybe it probably is to some degree, but it's based on the history. It's based on, as we just showed you the video, what they've done before and what the parties they work with are actively doing, like the U.S. government. But the alarm being sound could have been it could be an anomaly. But I believe this is interesting, one, because it shows you that they do that all the time to keep people in fear, the very people they claim that they're trying to keep safe. As we just saw the failure of the actual Iron Dome that's supposed to represent. But either way, I think that it was an indication of on the fence about actually just trying to pull that trigger. But it says the U.S. does not know when the Americans held the U.S. does not know when the Americans held hostage would be released or all of their conditions, Biden said. Does that make sense to you? So Biden's supposed to be this integral part to what they're doing, right? He's involved and he's talking with them, and he doesn't even know what's going on. Clearly, to Israel and Netanyahu, the Americans are meaningless in this conversation. He doesn't even know when they're going to come, what's going to happen. Apparently, they're supposed to be involved in this first process. And you should already know that 2 Americans were released by Hamas for no reason already. Mr. Biden said he thought the chances are real for the temporary pause in fighting to be extended. No, it's not. and that remains in contact with the leaders of Qatar, Egypt, and Israel, quote, to make sure this stays on track and every aspect of the deal is implemented. Do you think he even knows what's going on? When asked if he trusts Hamas to uphold its end of the deal, Biden said, I don't trust Hamas to do anything right. I only trust Hamas to respond to pressure. Okay, well then, how does that even make sense? So what's the pressure you're applying? The murdering of people in Gaza? That's the only thing that makes sense. So he basically just accidentally admitted that because we're murdering everybody, that will force them to give us back people. Well, that's exactly what Israel's doing, which means that they only think of the hostages as a secondary aspect. I mean, how are you going to, if you're going to make a deal with somebody, you have to trust that they're going to fulfill their side of it. It's a ceasefire. So what's the pressure, Biden? Doesn't make sense. I think it suggests that they know this isn't going to work. Mr. Biden also, it's funny how they call him Mr. Biden. Isn't it president? It's funny. Also acknowledged the trauma that the hostages have been through. He says all these hostages. So for a moment, let's pretend he means all of them because they're all people, right? They're all human beings. A lot of them are children on both sides. Or rather, a lot of them on one side, some of them on the other. As far as I could tell, there's only a few coming from Gaza-controlled area. We'll wait to see what comes next. My point is that in Israel, there's hundreds of children. Provable. And I mean children. Not even the teens. Hundreds. I'll read it right from their reports. But Biden's going, the trauma they've been through, right? All of these hostages have been through the terrible ordeal. And this is the beginning of a long journey of healing for them. Right? Because they're all being exchanged. But he goes on to say the teddy bears waiting to greet those children at the hospital are a stark reminder of the trauma these children have been through at the very young age. Oh, so are there teddy bears on both sides? Well, no, of course not, because he's only caring about the Israeli civilians. He didn't even mention the Palestinians because they don't matter to these people. They're just a piece in the game to get back the people that you care about. Even though these people have been killing them. These people have been allowing them to die. These people have been acting like they were meaningless until they needed to use them as a tool to further their agenda. As we keep showing you, they were not going to even have this deal. They denied the deal. Netanyahu days ago was saying it didn't even exist until he was forced, pressured by his population, the very population that our government is telling us are completely in lockstep with him. They are not. They despise him, and they think he's responsible. So my point is Biden doesn't care about any of the Palestinians, not even the Palestinian Americans. He's only talking about one side. Israeli Defense Forces spokesman Colonel Adray warned that the northern Gaza Strip remained, quote, a dangerous war zone. Well, this was not part of the agreement. He says, they say, and it is forbidden to move around. Well, does everybody know that? It's funny how you mention this after the supposed ceasefire starts, adding that people in the decimated Palestinian territory, decimated because they've been carpet bombing, must remain in humanitarian zone in the south of the Strip. God, the humanitarian zone that you've been bombing, starving, hurt, everything, cutting off electricity, bombing the hospitals, the schools, the mosques in the south. But they have the gall to call it a humanitarian zone. And it says only move toward that area on one designated road, adding that the movement of residents from the south of the Strip to the north will not be allowed in any way. There's already reports of people actually going from north to south also being shot. Just like has been happening since the very moment this started. Rather, since October 7th forward, started 75 years ago. Israel's military told CBS News it was looking into reports that several people were injured. They're talking about shooting civilians. Oh, we're looking into it. Well, we don't know for sure. Yeah, we do. We all do. We saw it. We saw you. You've been doing it the whole time. But trust, they're looking into it. Al Ghul said between 4,000 and 5,000 people had set off from Khan Yunis. And some of them told CBS News they felt hopeless, as nowhere in the Gaza Strip felt safe, as they just wanted to go back home. Clearly terrorists. Video shot by CBS News showed panicked civilians running back away from the Israeli forces at the crossing point. That's the kind of thing never used to get reported. They're telling you they're shooting at civilians as if that's somehow justifiable. 3 American hostages are expected to be among those 50 per a Biden official. Expected. I guess we're just crossing our fingers. But they made sure they bombed right up until the start. where hostages were being held, because that's how you know they care. The deal also included the release of 150 Palestinian prisoners, most of them women and children, who are being held in Israeli prisons. The Associated Press reported that journalists from their agency saw Palestinians waiting to greet the released prisoners and had tear gas fired at them. Yeah, you heard that right. I have a video of it. So they're releasing the people from their prisons for exchange for the ones that were in Gaza. And there were people with journalists waiting to greet them, and they fired tear gas at them. I mean, these just don't care what they look like right now. I think it's because they've never been called out like this and people weren't paying attention like this before. This is what they've always been doing. And realize those are journalists, the Associated Press. They just fire tear gas at them. And understand, their tear gas is something very dangerous. It's really not tear gas. Al-Ansari said he expected the release of Palestinian prisoners to follow closely after that of the Gaza hostages. See what I mean? Palestinian prisoners, Gaza hostages. According to Palestinian prisoner rights groups, there are an estimated 7,000 Palestinians currently jailed in Israel, including over 200 Palestinian children and about 75 women, with dozens arrested just in the past few weeks alone, with over 100 in the last 24 hours. So if they're giving you 13, how do we know it's not the 13 they took yesterday? And this is COGAT, this group that pretends to care about Palestine, saying, today, the largest shipment of humanitarian aid since the beginning of the war has been delivered. Making it sound like something good is happening, except the reality is it's a fraction of what's needed. Oh, I thought I highlighted it. It's somewhere down here. Or maybe it's another article. The point is, like, this just says the need is so great that no matter how much you're sending, we're going to need a lot more. Oh, wait, right here. No, it's another article, but I think it's they said like 5% of what normally was coming in. So no matter what you get right now, that seems like a lot. It's just a fraction of what's needed, especially at a time when people are this in starvation. Now, Danielle Modas also points out Israeli occupation forces stormed the homes of Palestinian families in occupied Jerusalem who were expecting a family member to come home. What's the point of that? It says, as part of the prisoner swap deal between Palestinian resistance and Israeli occupation forces, Israeli police are harassing even the journalists who are trying to cover the story. That's an Al Jazeera reporter getting harassed by the IDF. See? What's the point of raiding the homes of random families while you're about to release somebody back to them? This is just pure punishment. It's vitriol, guys. It's vindictive action. Now, here's the video of them dropping. They fire tear gas on people waiting to receive them back, which included journalists. All right, so this is how this usually goes, right? So you show a video like this, and rightly so. You can't, people don't know all the details, but people will just deny it. That's fake news. You're a liar. The point is that there were Associated Press journalists there who reported that. They fired tear gas as they were waiting for their family members, because that's the kind of vindictive nature we're talking about. Now, Danielle doing good work on this. She also reports that as the truce takes effect 49 days after the beginning of the ongoing genocide, streets in northern Gaza are filled with dozens of Palestinian families returning to their homes. The occupation forces have been deploying tear gas, firing shots in various areas. I mean, all of this is, guys, these are violations of the ceasefire, particularly in the farthest northern regions where their forces are stationed. So far, no injuries have been reported, but we now know 2 people have died. Despite the occupation's attempts at repressing the displaced, the flood of returning people is ongoing. Ambulances have started departing via the Rafah land crossing to transfer the wounded for medical treatment outside of the Gaza Strip. Recent reports confirm that fuel trucks have entered the crossing of this after the weeks of siege. Additional trucks loaded with food and aid are also making their way. The spokesperson for Gaza Crossing Authority said the volume of trucks now entering is only 1/5 of the usual daily amount. 1/5. Far more than 5%, but nonetheless, 1/5 of the daily amount. It's a band-aid and a bullet hole, especially with people that are in this much need. They know that. If they really wanted to help people, they would actually help them, because this is about giving them a little bit of something and then going right back to bombing them all. And realize, remember, they're telling you they're going to go into the south next. They're not letting them back to the north. They're pushing these people literally into the sea, which you've heard them say many times. Amid the siege and destruction, the people of Gaza demonstrate once again that the occupation will neither intimidate them nor prevent their return to their cities and homes. You can watch the videos of them trying to go back. Now, this is interesting. In regard to the conditions placed on the people being released, because let's remember, guys, they're not. I don't think any of them are going back to Gaza. They're going back to the West Bank and Jerusalem areas. Now, what's interesting is this is inside controlled Israel, right? So obviously they're still under the yoke of the Israeli government, no matter what they do. And so I believe this makes sense, but I'm going to show you the contradicting narratives we're seeing. And if you see something that's come out since I've been live, let me know. Daniela also is reporting it's emerged that the Israeli authorities have banned the released hostages and their families from communicating with the press or making any statements. That makes sense if that's true, based on what we've already seen them very embarrassed by people like Lifshitz. She came out and basically said they're being kind to me. They gave me feminine hygiene. Maintains that to this very day, even though people said she was being forced. No, clearly not. That doesn't mean that everybody else is treated that way. That would be the objective framing, but seems like so far we've been shown the opposite of what we were told. Says the violators will face a fine of $70,000, about $18,700, which these people don't have in most cases, coming from Gaza, obviously. Now, this is also being reported by Gaza News, same kind of stuff. Prohibition of their family gatherings or speaking out about the statements or even giving out candy and celebrating. Same kind of stuff we're hearing in a lot of different places. Here's Warfare Analysis saying the same kind of thing. But, and then here's one more. This was coming from one of these platforms, Released Israeli Captives Advised. Now this is a little bit different. This is from a mainstream platform. Advised. Actually, here's a better way to do this because it's also from Channel 12. Here's Channel 12 directly from Israeli media. This is their Channel 12 platform. Immediately upon returning to Israel, what is expected of the abductees? Now, this is interesting. First, this is what I was telling you earlier. In the first stage, the abductees will pass from the hands of Hamas to Red Cross. Number two, after being transferred to the Israeli army, they'll undergo initial examination by medical officials, which I wonder how that will go because most of these people seem to be completely unharmed. Are they going to then report something that challenges what we saw, that they were super malnourished or, whatever? But then it goes on to say, after being transferred to the army, or this one goes, number three, after the medical examination, they'll be transferred to medical centers. Like, it just seems crazy that you wouldn't just let them go back to their families. To medical centers throughout the country and will be reunited with their families after these stages, of course. In the hospitals, they will receive prolonged medical treatment. Now, why would that? Do they need that? It doesn't seem like the other ones necessarily did. In isolated complexes, separate from other patients, and will be treated there until they recover, as if that's a static reality, right? I think that feels very narrative control to me. During their stay in the medical centers, the medical officials, in cooperation with the security officials, will decide if the condition of the released abductees allow them to be interrogated. After the authorities confirm this, which it seems like either it's going to happen either way, just whether they're ready for it, the abductees will undergo a security investigation by the Shin Bet, like the FBI. In the case of the children who are released, they'll be interrogated by qualified child investigators who work with security systems. Okay, that sounds a little strange to me, guys. You don't normally treat them like they're the bad guy. I think this is about controlling the narrative like we just heard. In the sixth and final stage, so you have a 6-stage process. Can't just go home. The abductees will be transferred to the care of the government ministries that will assist them with their needs. I mean, it sounds like help, but also sounds like almost a little bit of intent, like you're being held, including medical health services. So you go from basically medical examination to a hospital location to a IDF interrogation to a Shin Bet interrogation to some sort of it seems like some government ministry care, whatever that means. That seems strange. Now, maybe it's being misinterpreted. You tell me. I just think that seems like an odd thing. It seems more about controlling what comes out of these people. Now, this is the part I was able to find. The only place I could find a source for this. But it challenges what everyone seems to be saying. Despite the anger after Yocheved Lifshitz's press conference upon her release, this time too, there will be no ban on media interviews of the abductees. However, They are expected to receive close supervision. That seems strange. And they will be instructed on what is true to tell in the media and what is not. What? So they're not allowed to tell you what they think happened? How is that not terrifying? It is important to note that the success of the planned procedure requires optimal operation of an extensive system, and it is not clear at this stage if all the entities involved will be able to implement it at this moment of truth. Because it's definitely the truth. It's the truth. Listen to us. It's the truth. Okay. Then finally, this is coming from same platform. Released Israeli captives advised not to make press statements. So there does seem to be some truth to this. Israel's Channel 12 says there will be coordination between the Israeli Health Ministry and the army spokesperson to keep control over the statements released by their captives. That's crazy. They may be in an attempt to ensure there is no repeat of the scene from Lipschitz we talked about. That led to a backlash. Of course, people were very angry that she was allowed to tell the truth. Sort of like censoring Haaretz. This is, as I've said 40,000 times so far, why everybody can see through this. The only people maintaining the line from the beginning are fools and fanatics, guys. It's very clear. Now, Max Blumenthal writes, the first release captive seen here, actually, I'll read this while I'm playing it. It says, the first release captive seen here illustrate how kibbutzism now rely heavily on non-Jewish semi-indentured labor from Thailand to maintain their existence. He's talking about the kibbutz, the area, and the rest of them. The foreign workers often sleep in sheds and work long hours for little pay. He says goodbye to the old socialist Zionist utopia that, quote, conquered the land. And he's talking about these people. These are some of the Thai workers and so on. Just interesting overlap to that. And they're releasing them without conditions, apparently. The 13 were part of the deal. These additional 10 were just people that they ended up taking that weren't necessary. And here's the older women. Now, they're getting really upset, apparently, because apparently Hamas is the one that got this video out to people, and they're saying Hamas is trying to pretend that they have humanity by holding these people like the arm around the kid. Yeah, certainly possible, or they're just not what you say they are. I quite frankly think it's somewhere in the middle. I think these people are not innocent. At the same time, they're not the living embodiment of Nazi ISIS overlap. Like, it's ridiculous what we're being told. I should have kept it playing. I will tell you, these people do not look like they're harmed. They don't look like they're malnourished. And everything else we've had shows us that hasn't been the case. Carrying this woman. Now, here's an example. Maybe she's malnourished. Maybe she's hurt. Certainly possible. Maybe she's just old. And look, either way, no matter how nice they were, this must have been terrifying for these people. You don't know what's going to happen. That shouldn't be diminished. And any of those people that are civilians, which clearly there's some of them, that is a crime. No matter what they say, that's a crime, right? I find it hard to believe that's an IDF member, right? That's a crime. No matter what the argument about why it's occupation, like there's you can understand their argument, but as I've said, I think it's a fine line we must draw. Civilians are always off limits, always. And these people are civilians. So nobody should be arguing they did not break the law. But when we get into the atrocity propaganda, I think it's becoming quite clear that we're being lied to about some of these things that happened. And some of these things were committed by the IDF. And that's why they're trying to delete everybody that's showing you this stuff. And, she waves to the camera. Does not seem like what we're being told. Here is an example of one of the Palestinians going home. And this is just a nice moment. He went straight to kiss his mother's hands. Palestinian children released from Israeli prison. Now, everybody in the Israeli propaganda sphere are trying to tell you that every one of these people are terrorists. Every one of them are murderers and stabbers and whatever else. But it's largely not the truth. The reality being that even the example of the woman, there's one woman they're showing going, she stabbed these people. There's a lot around the story that is not what we're being told, especially when you're living under occupation, especially when these are the people that will storm your home in the middle of the night and kick you on the street, that will burn your house down, will bulldoze your house with your possessions inside, that will rob, rape, murder, and steal with absolute impunity. It's not justifying illegal action, but you have to understand there's quite a bit different than just saying she just wanted to kill people, let alone wants to kill Jews. Now, here's another example. As it says, a historic, poignant moment. The captive, this woman here, Malik Suleiman, who was liberated by the Al-Qasim brigades, and the resistance meets her family after the release of her first resistance after the first deal. I think this is one of the women they're talking about. Here on the other side of it, this is a full list. Running list of confirmed Israeli detainees released today. Danielle Aloni, 44, and her daughter, 6, right? Obviously not an IDF member, right? That absolutely, without question, should be called out. They should be held accountable for taking that child, period. Most of these are elderly. Here's another child who apparently turned 9 while he was there. Actually, that was the kid I think we just saw coming out with the hat. Seemed completely taken care of for the most part. Does not mean it's okay he was taken. Just trying to be unemotional, as always, as we all should be when we're trying to cover the facts as a journalist or a reporter or an aggregator of information. Now, apparently, here's the full list. This is claiming a 2-year-old. I didn't see that anywhere, but that would be an example of, well, I guess the same point we're just making. But no, I was going to conflate that with the 1,400, 1,200 number. Because that point is about the babies and beheaded. That was the point that we were shown by Haaretz's information that the youngest that they found that was a dead person was 4, which is horrifying. But then we also know that a lot of these people were killed by their IDF bombings. I'm just explaining. I was going to say that about this, but either way, plenty of examples of people that are illegally taken. But the point on top of that is, remember, from the adults, whether women or not, if they're IDF members, if they're police, we're talking about in an occupied territory, for those that haven't heard me say this, per the United Nations, per anybody, anywhere that has any standing, Palestine's occupied by Israel. Gaza specifically, whatever the fact they say they pulled out, everybody is still arguing that they are occupying the area. The legitimate sense, all of Palestine, but specifically Gaza. The point then means, per the Geneva Conventions, they're allowed to fight with armed struggle, armed rebellion, which means when they carried out the attack, it was legal. And anybody who was a military target is a legal target. That child, they broke the law, and they should be held accountable for that. Now here, again, just to point out the ridiculousness of the corporate media, only Israeli minors are children. Palestinian minors are people aged 18 and younger. And this is actually a really egregious example. It literally says the hostages to be freed are women and children, and the Palestinian prisoners are also. So the fact that they said also, probably a mistake by them. That's the way language works. So the hostages freed are women and children, and the Palestinian prisoners are also women and people aged 18 and younger. So the fact that they said also means that you're saying they're the same. It's there's symmetry. Women and children here, also women and children here. But they can't say children, people aged 18 and younger. I mean, realize that some of the people they're showing in this image over here, or even that, I don't think this in this example, but they have people that are in that age range. I just think it's interesting that they can't just say that they have children, even though we know this. Now, here's what we're going to end with in general. This and then some examples as we go out, but I really want people to see this. And we're already at 2:30. I wish I got this done sooner because I want this to be heard. Maybe we'll make sure we make a clip of this. For somebody, if you guys aren't listening, make sure this gets broken down. This part right here. This is from Vox News. Not that we should blindly believe what Vox News writes. It's more propaganda. But it's interesting that this has shifted so much. And we will go to the United Nations, Amnesty International to back this up. November 22nd, why Israel imprisons so many Palestinians. So understand this, as we're getting into this dynamic where only one side are terrorists and only one side are innocent. You need to understand the reality, which I believe most people are beginning to see. On October 12th, it says in the West Bank, the village of Wadi al-Sik, Israeli soldiers and settlers detained 3 Palestinians and spent hours abusing them. The Israeli newspaper Haaretz reported that the Israelis stripped the detainees down to their underwear, blindfolded them, photographed them, beat them with knives and an iron pipe, put out cigarettes on their bodies, and even urinated on them. One of the detainees described the experience as Abu Ghraib with the Israeli military. All right. And realize these are the settlers that Israel has given official capacity since October 7th, or somewhere after October 7th. The Israeli military said that it's investigating the incident, hardly, but that a horrifying account did not occur in a vacuum. Since Hamas attacked Israel on October 7th, which now we know there's all sorts of examples that they knew it was coming, they didn't care to stop it, and that they killed their own people after that, Hannibal Directive. Palestinians in the West Bank have been victimized since October 7th and before by a surge in violence perpetrated by both Israeli soldiers and settlers. One of the major sources of that escalation is a tool of repression that Israel has long deployed against Palestinians and has used even more aggressively in recent weeks. It's called administrative detention, a practice that allows Israel to jail Palestinians indefinitely without charge or trial, which, by the way, is a huge portion of what we're dealing with. So all the people screaming like Ben Shapiro and the rest that they're all terrorists are disgusting people who frankly know this and don't care. And while Israel argues that this is a lawful preventative security measure, allowing it to target people for a range of just political activity, including speech, nonviolent protesting, human rights groups have deemed Israel's use of administrative detention a blatant violation of international law, like so much else it does, and nobody seems to care. Even beyond administrative detention, when charges are brought against Palestinians in the West Bank, not Gaza, the West Bank, they are almost always tried in military courts that have a near perfect conviction rate. Robert's written about this too. Why is it military? Because they know they're still on an ongoing occupation. That's why. And they'll admit it when it suits their interests. By contrast, it says Israelis are usually tried in civil court, even if it's involving Palestinians and attacks therein. Palestinians, in other words, are sent to a trap door instead of a fair trial. Think about that. Corporate media. You'd never hear this like 6 months ago. The result is that today, thousands of Palestinians, including hundreds of children, hear that, guys, hundreds of children are held in Israeli custody on murky legal grounds. A problem that's only gotten worse in recent years and exponentially worse since October 7th. We just showed you almost over 100 kids or over 100 kids taken just in the last 24 hours. You think they all had valid reasons? All those sycophants for Israel and Zionist supporters will tell you so, just because they want that to be real. They don't know that. And we can prove that it almost always isn't. So the ones they're releasing are not all murderers and terrorists and manipulators. They're clearly taking people for political reasons. That's always regarded as a crime anywhere. It says some human rights organizations have called out Israel's military-imposed legal system in the West Bank as evidence that Israel's committing the crime of persecution, intentionally depriving Palestinians of their fundamental rights because of their ethnic identity. Yep, exactly. That's why even well before this war, the release of these prisoners has been a key Palestinian demand in negotiations with Israel. That's why the whole point was they took them and kept them safe so they could get them back. And just this week, Israel agreed to a deal where Hamas will return 50 hostages in exchange for 150 Palestinian prisoners. You know, the deal that's been on the table since the first week, even according to Vice News and Washington Post, from the first week. That means all the times he lied and said there was no deal, Hamas won't let it. He was lying and he knew it, and he didn't care about the hostages he was probably killing when he bombed. The Israelis know this. They're screaming about it. Americans don't seem to hear it in the two-party paradigm, that is. He goes on to say that's why even well before this war, I've just read that, under imprisoned without charge or trial. And this is one of the most important parts. Before October 7th, the number of Palestinians held by Israel under administrative detention was already at a 20-year high before October 7th. Again, administrative detention meaning political reasons, often indefinitely held with no charge. According to the B'Tselem Israeli Human Rights Organization, there were 1,310 Palestinians imprisoned without charge or trial at the end of September, including 146 minors. Let's just go ahead and say half of them are children under the age of 12. Understand, there's a whole range of young kids. And the point is, the point is simply to say 146 minors makes the point alone. But my point is, you want to pretend that the ones that are 16, 17 don't count. I don't even know that would make sense. But just realize these numbers. The fact that people are still pretending like only what happened on October 7th matters. This was going on as far back as you want to look. It says, since then, Israel has dramatically increased its use of administrative detention, pushing the number of detainees to over 2,000 within the first 4 weeks of the war. That's out of a total of roughly 7,000 Palestinian political prisoners. I added political, but the point is that's what we're talking about. Israel contends that it has the right to circumvent certain international obligations in the West Bank. So make sure you hear what they're saying there. They're not claiming, like they're stupidly saying today, that what they're doing is in accordance with the law. They're making it clear at that point, we're just allowed to break the law. They're saying that it's not part of Israel's sovereign territory and therefore subject to military laws that can restrict people's rights. You see my point? So when they want to, it's an occupied territory, and we're still working on that. So that means under that law, that logic, that they're legally obliged to maintain the rights of these people, to protect those people. But they're not. They're using it against them. And on top of that, it's illegal to maintain an occupation like this in general. The point is that they are obviously lying. They play it out of both sides of their mouth. And in this case, they're acting like we don't have to respect their rights because that's not Israel, even though everywhere in the world argues all of this is occupied Palestine, or rather specifically, it's Israel that's occupying Palestine. Plenty of them play that game with the words, but the obvious reality, which is now becoming common knowledge. It says, but watchdog groups, of course, including the United Nations Human Rights Committee, argue that as the occupying power, which is not an argument, it's the static reality of international law, Israel must respect human rights in Palestinian territories, especially as the occupation grows older and more entrenched. So that's the exact dynamic. You can't pretend that that doesn't apply. It's the occupation that necessitates that it apply. And before the war, Israel was not, by and large, deploying this tool lawfully. Amnesty International has found that Israel's systematic use of administrative detention against Palestinians indicates that it's used to persecute Palestinians rather than as an extraordinary and selectively used preventative measure. Quote, evidence has shown that administrative detention as a pretext to persecute and deprive people of their fundamental rights and freedoms because they challenge the Israeli military occupation. This is the reality, guys. Just because Biden and people in the corporate media and people in the governments tell you otherwise. It's always been the reality. People are finally paying attention. In 2022, I've read this to you, Amnesty International released a comprehensive report pointing to the practice of administrative detention as just one example of how the Israeli state subjugates Palestinians and cracks down on dissent. Since 1967, Israel has issued over 1,000 military orders that criminalize a range of activities in Palestinians' daily lives, including waving political symbols like their flag, being in certain areas without permits that randomly changes when they want to and they don't inform them about it, sort of like the leaflets they claim they drop and they don't care if anybody sees it, and any kind of speech that can fit into a loosely defined charge of incitement. That's most of what we're talking about. Citing decades of evidence, the Amnesty report outlined a, quote, intentional Israeli policy to detain individuals, including prisoners of conscience, solely for the nonviolent exercise of their right to freedom of expression and association, and punish them for their views. Indeed, over the years, it goes on, Israel has detained hundreds of people, including dozens of journalists, for security reasons that amounted to nothing more than social media posts. And since October 7th, Israeli forces have been aggressively policing what Palestinians are saying online. Talal Nasir, a lawyer at the Palestinian Prisoner and Human Rights Organization, Adamir, I'm not sure what that, that's the name of it, Adamir, I think, told me that, speaking as the writer, told this person that even social media posts that merely include Palestinian flags or quotes from the Quran are being targeted by Israel as sources of incitement. We've already proven this to you. And then finally, it finishes by saying Israel has a long history of torturing Palestinian prisoners. In 1999, the Israeli Supreme Court reviewed various methods of torture used by Israeli agencies and issued a ruling outlawing them. The Israeli government report released the following year not only admitted to the systematic use of torture against Palestinians during the First Intifada, but also found that law enforcement agencies had lied to cover it up. Yet more than 2 decades later, Palestinian detainees and prisoners still report being subject to torture and other types of humiliating and inhumane treatment, as in the case of the 3 Palestinians detained in Wadi al-Sheikh last month. And despite its 1999 ruling, the Israeli Supreme Court has repeatedly allowed for torture to continue under certain circumstances. It just makes you sick. Since October 7th, there has been a spike in reports of abuse and ill treatment of Palestinian detainees and prisoners, the very ones they claim are the ones they're releasing now, and making every effort to make sure you don't see what they've been through. Qadra Fares, the head of the Palestinian Authority Commission for Prisoners' Affairs, told Reuters that at least 4 Palestinians have died while being held in Israeli custody, adding that their autopsies revealed evidence of torture and medical neglect. The exact opposite of what we're seeing from the people held with Hamas right now. These harsh conditions were widespread before the war, and even children held in detention have been subject to ill treatment, physical abuse, solitary confinement, and more. Such practices are not only point to more evidence of the unlawful nature of Israel's detention policies, but also give more weight to the growing calls on Israel to release Palestinian prisoners. Now, where do you think the United States government got these practices from? Or rather, because of the organization, the collaboration between the two, that they work off of each other. Abu Ghraib. They still do this stuff today. That's why I forget her name now. Trump brought on the next lady, and she was the one that allowed torture. We pretend like we don't. It's obvious that they're just going through the motions. They just tell you something different. This is what has always been going on. Here is the United Nations. Just for interest of time, just reports on conditions of Palestinian prisoners. This is from 2015 in prisons in occupied Palestine. Since the start of the Israeli occupation in 1967, the overall number of prisoners and detainees held captive has exceeded 850,000 Palestinian civilians, according to the United Nations, including 15,000 women, tens of thousands of children, in grave violation of relevant provisions of the Geneva Conventions, which they don't care about because nobody holds them accountable. Since 2000, more than 8,500 cases of administrative detention, right? So just political reasons, no charge, have been registered among more than 10,000 children, approximately 1,200 women, more than 65 elected members of the Palestinian Legislative Council, former ministers. Israel's arbitrary detention practices target all members of Palestinian society: youth and elderly, women, mothers, spouses, the sick, the disabled, academics, lawmakers, ministers, union leaders, students, writers, and artists. More than 6,500 Palestinians are currently imprisoned or detained in 22 Israeli occupation prisons in Israel on the occupied West Bank. Among these are 478 persons who have been sentenced to life imprisonment once or multiple times, 21 women, including 2 girls, 200 children under the age of 18 for life, 480 prisoners held in administrative detention, 16 elected members of the Palestinian Legislative Council, and 1,500 persons who are sick or suffering from illnesses for life. So those 200 children, guess we don't care about them. 30 persons have been detained since or before the conclusion of the Oslo Accords and have spent more than 20 years in Israeli prisons. My God. Conditions of arrest and detention. It says upon arrest, prisoners and detainees endure physical abuse, humiliation, violation of international law. They're not informed of the reason for their arrest or detention. Democracy. During interrogation, investigation, they're routinely exposed to physical torture, physical intimidation. This is directly from the UN. They endure beating, solitary confinement, denial of family visits, confiscation of possessions, provocative inspection, deprivation of necessary medical care. All of the stuff that Hamas isn't doing right now, at the very least, so with what we've seen so far. 206 Palestinian prisoners and detainees died in Israeli jails as a result of cruel treatment and harsh conditions, as per the United Nations. 71 died from torture. 54 due to medical negligence. 74 assassinated after detention. How in the world is this not seen? 7 of them died as a result of direct shooting by soldiers or guards while in jail and custody. Child detainees. During the past 4 years, Palestinian children have been increasingly targeted by Israeli detention. More than 200 just from the first quarter of 2015. Palestinian children are abducted after terrifying conditions, most often in the darkness of night, by Israeli forces. How in the world is that accepted by anybody? They're denied basic rights, sentenced and convicted, fined and confined to their homes. 95% of children released from these jails reported suffering from torture, ill treatment during interrogation and detention. Child detainees are tried before a military court, some of which they don't even tell the parents. Same thing with the women. Same thing with the sick. Administrative detention, 480 held in administrative detention without charge, based on the secret file provided by the Occupation Intelligence Agency. But democracy, right? They have the same rights as Jews in this country. Do they? They don't. Netanyahu made that clear. He said explicitly, but they say otherwise in the U.S. media, on Twitter. Their occupying power respects not, and this is directly, again, this is the United Nations speaking per their report. Israel, the occupying power, as I keep telling you, respects neither the Third Geneva Convention nor the Fourth with regard to its treatment of Palestinian prisoners and detainees. It treats them as terrorists and criminals and imposes its internal military law on them. Now, here's the point. Just because they arrest a child for posting a social media post and they name them terrorists, and then Ben Shapiro says they're all terrorists, and then people online act like they're all murderers, does that make them murderers? Obviously not. The Israeli Court of High Justice rejected thousands of complaints filed on behalf of these prisoners who suffered torture. My God. Yeah, this simply says, contrary to the Fourth Geneva Convention, the occupying power, that is Israel, that's not just Gaza, guys, that's because it's occupying Palestine, detains its keeps detainees in prisons inside Israel, hinders family visits, imposes individual collective punishment. Hundreds of detainees and prisoners are deprived of books, visits, provisions of clothes, blankets in cold season. Unreal. Now, I already read this one to you, so I'm going to skip it since we're about to pass 3. But this is the one I already showed you. This is from before. This is from July 10th, showing you. And this carceral means, like prison practices. They're unlawful practices in how they imprison people. Tantamount to international crimes in open air prison. And yet, media, governments just shout you down. All the facts have always been there. Everything they're doing, all of this is criminal. All of it. 700 Palestinian prisoners to suffer in prison, including 24 with cancer. Yeah, I already read this to you guys. The point, this one is more important to finish. So this is from Amnesty International. Horrifying cases of torture and degrading treatment of Palestinian detainees amid spike in arbitrary arrests. This is from November 8th. So this is new, post-October 7th. Horrifying cases of torture. Are you seeing this on both sides? Do you have reports coming from the international community showing torture? No. Doesn't mean it's not possible or that's not happening. But it's amazing that we can ignore provable examples because they're racist. Or whatever they say to get you to look away. I think I just included that so you can look at it, but it's read this. Horrifying. Now, to end in general, here is Avi Meir, the editor-in-chief, Jerusalem Post. Remember this, he says, after what we just showed you, mind you. The Palestinians who will be released in the impending deal are convicted terrorists who are in prison because they tried to murder Israelis. This is the editor-in-chief of a huge platform. He knows he's lying. Let me say that again. He knows he's lying. That's crazy. And as we showed you before, Ben Gvir says, quote, on Monday, there will be the first reading of the death penalty law. for Palestinian political prisoners. They're not even hiding who they are anymore. This guy. So they're passing laws that allow them to kill the political prisoners, the children, the elderly, the women, because they threw a stone, because they posted something wrong, because they said the wrong thing in public. That's what we're talking about. In case you don't believe it, here it is. Oh, you know what? You know what? That's right. I closed it because Times of Israel covered this. It's a very real. I think I just did this. Let me see real quick. Forget why I closed it. There it is. Bill on death penalty for Palestinian terrorists, which of course that's how they frame it, right? The point is we're talking about, as he even stated, political prisoners. And the reality being that the vast majority of those in there, per the UN, per Vox, per Amnesty International, are administrative detention. Here, Ben Gvir, same person, back in January of this year. Well, he visited these jails. Why? To make sure the conditions were unimproved. That's the kind of people we're dealing with. To make sure that they did not meet international standards for jailing anybody, whether terrorist or not. I will continue to handle the holding of conditions of security prisoners so they do not get any added benefits of security prisoners. That's the children we're talking about. And you can read this for yourself. 12 Ball points out these are over 100 IDF soldiers' testimonials from their 2008-2009 massacre in Gaza, basically admitting to all manner of war crimes. You can read it. This is links there. It's directly cited to their statements. You can read it for yourself. Talking about using human shields, indiscriminately firing on civilians, destroying entire neighborhoods for no reason. And you can listen to the old Zionist people talking about the first Nakba. They'll tell you the same thing, raping women, laughing about it. It's very obvious. And in no way am I suggesting all Jews are like this or all Israelis. Anybody broad stroking any group of people is an ignorant person. We all know that. Now 972 points out that if you don't leave, we will kill you. This is being told to Palestinians in the West Bank. Hundreds flee Israeli settler violence. You know, the same ones that spit on, urinated on, tortured those people, and the media looked away and didn't say anything about it. These are people that have been now given official capacity by Israel. Now they're going, if you don't get out of your home, we'll kill you. That's what's happening. This is in the West Bank, and they're talking about, these are people in West Bank saying these settlers attacked me. The world is pointing it out. Israel does not care. These people are being driven out of their homes. It's Palestine they're going after. And Arnaud Bertrand also points out, even the Washington Post has admitted what we were telling you. An investigation by the French organization Reporters Without Borders into the killing in October of a Reuters cameraman concluded several of these were killed by, not only that they were just killed, but they were explicitly targeted. Do you realize how important this is, that even the Washington Post has been forced to acknowledge that Israel is targeting journalists? Don't miss how important that is. Not because Washington Post cares about the truth, because of how much this has broken their control over your information. They targeted a Reuters journalist, and Ben doesn't care. Eli doesn't care. People out there that are covering this don't care. Those are journalists we're pretending they are anyway. They called them. Ben even said just because they have a camera doesn't make them, like, literally allowing, obfuscating, whitewashing, justifying the murder of journalists because they cover the story objectively. And he writes, this was common sense. You don't kill 30 plus journalists in a month, often at their homes with their entire families, as an unfortunate mistake. This explicit targeting of journalists makes the barely concealed support of their many media for Israel all more reprehensible. And as Decentered News points out, oh, and by the way, I think I incorrectly said this was Sam Husseini's platform. It's not run by him, but I guess they just collaborate quite often. It says the count, according to this list maintained by Press Freedom, is now up to 53. That's 11 more journalists in the past week alone. They're targeting people trying to show you what's going on. A lot of them are just Gaza journalists, but yeah, some of them are Reuters, AP. We've already shown you this. They don't care. Where are these outlets? Where's Reuters? Wouldn't you be outraged? Apparently not. According to it's just basically showing you all the different breakdowns. It's absurd. It's obscene. And Solomon Ahmed points out heinous crimes of their forces. Interestingly enough, horrifyingly enough, a burnt baby. Now, what this is from that same thing we're showing you earlier. These are just the charred remains of a pregnant woman and people that were told they could safely flee who were bombed. So as they said, every crime they accused Hamas of, they're doing themselves. That's his opinion, but I mean, quite frankly, it seems to be the case. And let's not forget, they even admitted, like they reported, 1,400, we revised it down to 1,200 because it turns out we burned them so badly, we couldn't tell they were Hamas. Yeah, well, we already know that they were people standing right next to them when you did that. And some of these may actually be Israelis. And this guy, again, one of these people, the Israeli government spokesman, he says, by the time we're done, Hamas will never lay his dirty hands on our people again. This war will end with the end of Hamas. All right. So instead of acknowledging that they're not harmed, they're not like this is all about the propaganda push to argue that they're so bad as you're torturing children, as you're illegally detaining people, and you've been doing so for decades. But the point is they're that bad. I don't think any of these people, they've all broken the law and all deserve accountability. But I think it's very obvious at this point what side has been long-term committing egregious violations of international law and is justifying genocide right in front of you. And that's what they're trying to keep from your view. As what you really see here is people that do not appear to be harmed in any way. Lastly, Dan Cohen writes, Israel is a problem with deserting soldiers. Now, this may very well be the case. And if it is true, and this is based off this, I'll just read what it says here first. Following the war, the main military prosecution intends to tighten the policy of prosecuting defectors from regular and reserve service, which we also heard early on that was happening, and to demand prolonged prison sentences of several months for anyone who defected. That was happening in Ukraine too. Tends to happen when you're not on the just side of things. And that's not to say that any side is the just side here, but just the point is when you're on a side that you can clearly tell, like a lot of American soldiers in Iraq, that just very quickly realized that they were not fighting for freedom. And that the same thing we saw in Ukraine. The point is that this is an Israeli platform reporting this, that people, they have a problem with people defecting. Now, whether that's a large problem or not is up for you to decide. Point is the military will punish them, he says, with prolonged prison sentences. He says, is it that they don't want to die to preserve Netanyahu's political career and fulfill the Zionist dream of ethnically cleansing Gaza? Or maybe they watch the Al-Qasim GoPro videos and it's the photos of your Netanyahu in Miami. The point is, I think that what we're seeing, if that is what's really happening, is that these people are not all terrible people. They're just average Israelis that go through the IDF. And a lot of people end up seeing this stuff or realizing that our arbitrary killing of random people is not something they want to be a part of. At least that's what I'd like to hope, that there's humanity that is out there. I thought I had more posts in there, but in any case, I think that everybody, including the Israeli people and many that are in the IDF, are very aware of where this is going. And I think that right now, this is a massive effort to basically whitewash, kind of hide all of what's happening from you in a desperate effort to maybe think that we can push past this with the next big event that happens or orchestrated that pulls us in a different direction. I really don't know. But what I do know is right this moment, everybody everywhere sees this, including them, including the people that support them. And they're drowning in the lies right now. I just think it's important that we acknowledge the crimes, not just from October 7th forward, but now that people are actually honestly engaging with this, that we hold these people accountable for what they've been doing this entire time. And yes, engage with the crimes that were committed post October 7th. But if like we played that clip before, which has been getting more reach the last couple of days, when the Israeli journalist asked him, what about October 7th? And the guy literally goes on to say, what about October 8th? What about October 9th? What about October 10th? And goes all the way to November. I mean, it's not an invalid question. Like, sure, as we've been doing, we can talk about what happened there, but are you like, why do you not care about anything other than that first day? I mean, we all know the answer to that, whether for propaganda or an agenda or because you don't care about Palestinians. It's obvious that there has been, as we were told, as I think it was the United Nations or I forget, it was one of these NGOs or international outlets that are talking about 115 children a day. I mean, it's really just breaking down the math on what we can see, what we can prove. 115 children every day for 49 days straight, 115 a day. And we're not supposed to act like that's a crime. We're supposed to pretend like that's justifiable because of human shield that we can't see. And everything you've shown us has been walked back and disproven. I mean, it's unreal. I really just continue to argue that I just feel like this desperate need to stop the people from continuing to be murdered in front of us. I mean, because we care about civilians and human life, but also because it's being forced into your view every day while being told this is okay. This is not a crime. They're fighting for freedom. They're fighting terrorism. And it just makes me sick. It turns my stomach every time I see it. We need to stop the people that are being hurt. The ceasefire continues and the ceasefire continues and they continue to shoot and attack. And quite frankly, I think there's plenty of other ways they've already violated the ceasefire. I'm willing to bet you that there'll be something that they claim happened on the other side, which then initiates the violence more. And even if they don't do that, they told you they're going to go right back to it the moment this ends. What's the point of that? They're not even giving enough aid to meaningfully change anything, even 4 days of it. So they're just going to continue the onslaught. Say something, do something, stand up, get people's attention, show them the information we're presenting here, break it off, just show them the link. I don't care. Get it in front of people to make sure they understand what the reality is and who we're talking about here, in hopes that not only we can stop the murder from continuing, but change the next step, where it goes after this. When everything settles back and we act like this is some kind of normal situation. No, there needs to be tribunals here. People need to be held accountable, including our governments. Find the courage, stay the course, stand up for what's right. I love you all. And if you want to support this platform, make sure you find the links down below. We need your support, guys. I keep saying we plan to change the game. I'm going to do my best to try in a way to make sure that they can't just push people off or hide platforms, that we can change the dynamic where nonpartisan objective people actually become the center point as opposed to the peripheral that gets ignored, because that's what it should be. Objective, nonpartisan. It's amazing that that's not the focus. But in any case, guys, down below, support us. We need your help. I love you all. As always, question everything. Come to your own conclusions. Stay vigilant.